June 323 BCE. Babylon is dying with its king. Alexander lies upon a golden couch in the palace of Nebuchadnezzar II. Around him, generals whisper prayers in languages gathered from half the known world. The air itself seems to hold its breath, waiting to see whether the son of Macedonia will rise again. He has conquered lands from the marble cliffs of Greece to the riverlands of the Indus. He has named more cities than any man before or since. And now, at only 32, his body, fevered, trembling, failing, betrays him. Yet history is a fragile thing. One heartbeat more or less, one drop of medicine, one night of gentler air, and everything we know could have been rewritten. In this world, the gods are silent. But a physician, perhaps more cautious, perhaps more lucky, mixes the potion differently. He cools the fever with snow from the mountains. He keeps the young king breathing through the night. By dawn, Alexander's eyes open, the court falls to its knees, and the world begins again. Outside, the Euphrates glows with the reflection of a newborn sun. Pigeons scatter over the ziggurats of Babylon. The empire stirs, uncertain, as if the universe itself has been asked to continue a story that should have ended. When Alexander rises from his sickbed, the physicians call it a miracle. But he, son of Philip, pupil of Aristotle, heir of Achilles, sees it differently. He calls it an extension of destiny. He has seen death face to face. He has felt the hand of Hades almost close upon him. And in surviving, he is convinced that the gods have granted him 20 more years. Not as a gift, but as a test. Babylon becomes his chrysalis. The fever has burned away his youth's vanity, the drunken pride of conquest. Now there is clarity. The empire is vast but fragile. Persia simmers with resentment. Macedon strains under distance. His generals eye one another across the throne room, measuring futures that depend upon his death. He knows it all, and now he has time. The first days of recovery are quiet. He walks among the gardens, hanging terraces, canals filled with lilies, and he remembers Aristotle's lessons. That empire without philosophy is tyranny, that conquest without purpose is mere appetite. He begins to speak again of unity, not of lands, but of peoples. He dreams of a single empire stretching from the pillars of Heracles to the eastern sea, bound not by the spear, but by exchange, learning, and law. The fever, it seems, has burned the conqueror and left behind the statesman. At night, he dictates to his scribes plans for roads through Arabia, harbors in the Red Sea, observatories in Babylon, and a council, half Greek, half Persian, to govern the empire's heart. Those who listen think he is delirious, but his words will become blueprints for the next 20 years. Word spreads through the camps. Alexander lives. From Egypt to the Indus, the soldiers, those weary men who had prepared for their king's funeral, begin to dream again. Their pay chests are refilled, sacrifices are made, and banners rise once more in the Mesopotamian wind. He summons his marshals, Craterus, Ptolemy, Perdiccas, Seleucus, Nearchus. He thanks them and then warns them. The empire, he says, is not yet complete. To stop is to die. We march again. His next target is Arabia, that vast, uncharted peninsula of incense routes and unyielding deserts. He intends to build harbors along its coasts, to link the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf, to make of it a bridge between East and West. But beyond that, deeper still, another ambition begins to form. Whispers of Carthage reach him from sailors, rumors of Rome from Greek merchants newly returned from the West. There, he is told, are rising powers, young, hungry, and untested. And Alexander, survivor of Babylon, can feel destiny calling him westward. Before he marches, Alexander convenes a grand council. Babylon's halls blaze with torches. The air smells of myrrh and politics. Representatives from every province attend. Persians in robes of white, Macedonians in armor, Egyptians with scrolls, Indians with jeweled turbans. He rises before them, thinner than before, his voice hoarse yet unbreakable. 20 years ago, he begins, I swore to bring light where there was shadow, to unite what was divided. I failed to see that conquest alone cannot bind the world, but I have returned, and we shall build not merely an empire, but a civilization. He proclaims Babylon the capital of this new, universal kingdom. He establishes the Council of Nations, composed of both conquerors and conquered. And though his generals bristle, for power shared is power lost, the charisma that once led them across continents still holds them silent. Outside, the people cheer. Within, the seeds of rebellion quietly take root. Night after night, Alexander walks the palace terraces alone. He gazes toward the western horizon, toward the sea, toward Rome. He does not yet know the name of that city's coming greatness, but he senses it. An echo in the wind, a rival destiny forming beyond the Hellenic world. In his journals, he writes, "The gods grant no eternity, only the illusion of it. If I am to outlast death, I must craft a world that cannot forget my name." Thus begins the second life of Alexander. The years that follow will see Babylon reborn as the heart of a world empire. Its streets widened, its ziggurats transformed into academies of geometry and medicine, its libraries filled with scrolls from Athens, Alexandria, and Persepolis alike. Aristotle's surviving pupils arrive to lecture in the shadow of Mesopotamian temples. Astronomers study the heavens, mapping planets with instruments forged by Macedonian artisans. The old city of kings becomes a furnace of ideas, the first experiment in what Alexander calls the unity of mankind. And yet far away, the old world mutters. Sparta grumbles of purity lost. Athens sneers at barbarian philosophy. Persian satraps whisper of betrayal. Each in their own way, dreams of the king's death again. In our history, Alexander's death shattered his empire within months. But in this world, he breathes. And because he breathes, the future itself begins to shift. The world does not yet know it, but the next 20 years will rewrite the map of civilization. From Arabia's burning sands to the forests of Gaul, from the temples of Egypt to the marble of Rome. The boy who once sought to rival Achilles now prepares to rival the gods themselves. Months have passed since the fever that almost ended an empire. Now the conqueror who once lay trembling on the edge of death walks again through the corridors of Babylon. His steps are slower, his shoulders thinner. Yet something in his eyes, something unbroken, burns brighter than ever before. The soldiers whisper that he has been reborn. The priests call it a miracle. But Alexander himself calls it something else, a command. He believes he has looked into the abyss, and the abyss looked back and yielded. Babylon breathes again under the heat of morning. The Euphrates glitters beyond the palace walls, its waters running thick with reflected flame. Courtiers bow as Alexander passes, Persians, Greeks, Egyptians, Bactrians. A living mosaic of a world he forged by sword. He does not smile, he hardly speaks. But in the stillness behind his silence, his mind races faster than ever. In the palace gardens, he stands beneath a date palm and watches the wind ripple through its fronds like ocean waves. Every breath of air feels borrowed, every heartbeat, a divine loan that must be repaid through action. And then his gaze drifts south, toward the endless haze that swallows the horizon, toward the land that the old maps leave blank. To the Greeks, Arabia is little more than rumor, a furnace of shifting dunes, home to ghosts and merchants of fire. Yet sailors from the Red Sea tell stories of hidden kingdoms where the air itself smells of incense, of tribes who trade gold for myrrh, of cities carved into the heart of red stone. And somewhere beyond that burning expanse, the waters of the great southern sea glimmer beneath stars no Greek has ever named. For most men, such stories are legend, but for Alexander, they are invitation. Cut to close up. Alexander's eyes catch the light of dawn. He remembers his teacher Aristotle, whose words once filled his boyhood mind. To understand the world, one must find its edges. Alexander had found the eastern edge, the Indus, the land where elephants outnumber horses, where gods wear different faces. But the southern edge, the one lost in myth and mirage, that he has yet to see. Every night since his recovery, he dreams. He dreams of oceans without shorelines, of stars that burn green and gold, of temples rising from the sand, like memories of forgotten gods. In his dream, a voice whispers, "You are not done." He wakes before dawn, breathless, drenched in sweat. He writes in his journal, "The world is incomplete. I have seen the rim of heaven and earth, yet there remains a horizon that eludes me. The gods did not spare me to rest. They spared me to finish what they began, and beneath those words, a single symbol, a circle, unbroken." When dawn rises over Babylon, the courtiers find their king already awake, surveying maps by lamplight, scribbling notes, whispering to himself. He eats little, sleeps less. He speaks to astronomers about the position of the southern stars, to shipwrights about the winds that cross the Arabian Sea, to merchants about the caravans that vanish into dunes and return with perfume and ivory. His generals watch in silence. To them, this is madness. To him, it is revelation. Craterus, loyal and cautious, approaches him one morning. "Alexander," he says, "you have conquered everything that lives. There are no more kings left to dethrone." Alexander looks up from his map, eyes shining like flame reflected in steel. "There are no kings left," he replies softly, "because I have yet to create them." Since his illness, a strange transformation has taken hold of him. He no longer speaks only of war, but of philosophy, of blending the wisdom of Greece with the order of Persia, the science of Egypt with the discipline of Macedon. He tells his scribes that conquest is only the first step of creation, that an empire held by fear will crumble, but one bound by knowledge may endure forever. And yet, for all his words of peace, his eyes betray the hunger that no peace can satisfy. For Alexander, knowledge is another form of conquest, the conquest of mystery itself. He summons his generals. Ptolemy arrives from Egypt, his cloak scented with Nile air. Seleucus comes from the eastern provinces, bearing tribute and suspicion alike. Perdiccas, Craterus, and Hephaestion's empty chair complete the circle. When all are seated, Alexander speaks, slowly at first, then with the rising certainty of prophecy. "My brothers," he says, "our work is unfinished. The world we rule is vast, but it ends where the horizon begins. Arabia lies beyond that line, the last veil between mankind and the sea that circles the earth. We will cross it, We will build cities where none stand, and harbors where the gods themselves have drawn no map. A heavy silence follows. Only the crackling of torches dares to interrupt. Perdiccas is the first to speak. Arabia is a graveyard, my lord. The sands will swallow armies whole. Alexander smiles faintly. So said they of Persia, so said they of India, and yet, here we sit. He leans over the map, tracing a path southward with his finger. Every step through the desert is a step toward eternity. His generals exchange wary glances. They see it now. The same fire that drove him across the Hindu Kush. The same fever that toppled Darius and burned Persepolis. But this time, the fire burns colder, more deliberate, as though kindled by something no longer mortal. Ptolemy later writes in his chronicles, "He spoke not like a man planning a march, but like a god remembering creation." In that moment, the course of the next 20 years is sealed. When the council disperses, Alexander remains alone. He walks the balcony overlooking the sleeping city. Below him, the Euphrates glimmers like a vein of light across the desert's dark heart. In the distance, torches flicker. Soldiers on the night watch, guardians of a dream too large to see. He whispers to the river, "If the gods had wished me to die, they would not have let me see this dawn." The water murmurs back, and in that murmur he imagines an answer, soft, distant, inevitable. He looks south again. Beyond the dark horizon lies the unknown, and he feels the same thrill he once felt as a boy standing on the shores of Macedon, watching ships vanish into the Aegean mist. He feels alive, alive as he has never been before. What he cannot see, what no man can, is how that same horizon will one day devour all he loves, how the deserts will test not only his army, but his soul. For every journey begins as a dream, and dreams, no matter how divine, demand a price. Still, he turns from the balcony and calls for his armor to be polished, his banners to be mended, his shipwrights to prepare the vessels for the journey south. By dawn, the city hums with rumor. The King of Kings will march again. And as the first light of morning bleeds across the bricks of Babylon, Alexander the Great stands at his window and smiles. History remembers him as the man who could not stop. But in this world, the world that might have been, it was not ambition that drove him. It was revelation. He believed that by walking one step farther, he might finally touch the edge of eternity. Babylon, the beating heart of the known world, where the rivers of the Tigris and Euphrates entwine like twin serpents of eternity. Here, beneath its gilded ziggurats and hanging gardens, Alexander the Great calls his council once more. It is the year 323 before the birth of Christ, or rather the first year of a new age, for history itself has begun to bend around one man's will. In the marble hall of Nebuchadnezzar's palace, torches hiss and flicker against walls, carved with lions and winged bulls. The air smells of cedar oil and incense, thick with the breath of empire. One by one, the generals arrive: Ptolemy, Craterus, Seleucus, Perdiccas, Nearchus, and Hephaestion's empty seat, draped in blue silk. Each bears scars of conquest, men forged in India's jungles, Persia's plains, and the snows of the Hindu Kush. Their eyes are hard, yet uncertain. They have seen their king die once before and return, not as a mortal, but as something more. When Alexander enters, the room stills. He wears no crown, only a plain Macedonian cloak and a dagger at his side. Yet the silence around him feels heavier than any throne. Upon the great table of marble and lapis, a map is spread, vast, hand-painted, and unfinished. The known world glows in ochre and blue, from the dark mountains of Thrace to the shining delta of the Indus. Beyond Arabia, however, there is only blank parchment, the color of waiting fate. Babylonian scribes whisper of lands beyond the desert, of traders who carry incense and gold from cities called Saba and Gera, of coasts lined with temples, of ships that vanish toward the southern sea, and of winds that smell of cinnamon and fire. Greek scholars dismiss these tales as superstition, but Alexander listens. To him, the unknown is not a warning, it is a summons. Craterus speaks first, his voice firm, his brow furrowed with reason. Craterus, my king, the men are weary. They have marched since they were boys. Persia bleeds still. India smolders. Even now satraps whisper rebellion. We must let the empire breathe. He gestures to the map, his finger tracing the long road back to Macedon. A road that few still remember how to walk. Then Ptolemy speaks, ever the tactician, the historian in armor, Ptolemy. Arabia is no empire, my lord. It is sand, wind, and mirage. The gods placed that desert there to mark the edge of the world. At this, Seleucus, the ambitious commander of the royal guard, interjects. Seleucus, and yet Ptolemy, was not India said to be impassable? And still we crossed it. Still we conquered. If the gods drew borders, Alexander has made it his art to erase them. A murmur ripples through the chamber, half admiration, half dread. Every man in that room has seen what Alexander's will can do. It moves armies, kingdoms, and the very stars. At last, Alexander raises his hand. Silence falls like a blade. He stands before the map, the uncharted south, and places his palm upon the blank parchment. Alexander, we have crossed rivers that drowned kings and climbed mountains that broke empires. We have seen gods of India bow before us. Yet here, he taps the empty space. Here lies the horizon. It mocks us with its silence. He turns to them, eyes bright with the fever of vision. Alexander, when I lay dying, I saw the world as flame, not as it is, but as it could be. I saw ships sailing beyond Arabia, bringing back treasures from lands no man has dreamed. If I have lived again, it is not to rest. It is to finish the circle the gods began. The words hang in the air, half prophecy, half madness. The generals exchange uneasy glances. Craterus kneels, his voice trembling between loyalty and fear. Craterus, then we march again, my king. But the men will ask, why? What lies beyond this desert that no man survives? Alexander steps closer, his shadow falling across the map. Alexander, truth, Craterus. The truth of the world, the edge of the divine. And if I must die again to touch it, so be it. As if to seal his words, a gust of wind sweeps through the chamber. The torches flare, their flames bending southward, toward Arabia. The priests gasp. The augurs whisper, a sign. Even the hardened soldiers shudder, for they remember the tales. How the gods spoke to Alexander in storms and stars. To the men of reason, it is coincidence. To the men of faith, it is destiny. But to Alexander, it is confirmation. That night, long after the council disperses, Alexander remains alone in the hall. Only the map keeps him company, its blank parchment gleaming faintly under lamplight. He traces the edge of Arabia with his finger, then the curve of Egypt's coast, the mouth of the Indus, a silent meditation on empire and eternity. In that moment, he no longer sees territory. He sees a web, threads of trade, of language, of culture, binding east and west into one living world. A world ruled not by swords, but by exchange, by knowledge, by the idea of unity. He whispers softly, "When the last frontier falls, there will be no more wars. Only one world and one dream." By dawn, the decision is made. Arabia will be his next campaign. Ships will be built at the Persian Gulf, scouts sent to chart the desert routes, supply lines carved from Babylon's fertile plain to the edge of the dunes. In the temples, sacrifices are offered to the gods of sea and sand. In the barracks, soldiers polish their weapons with weary pride. And in the streets of Babylon, rumors spread like wildfire that their king will soon march where no mortal dares. To the common man, it is madness. To the poets, it is legend. To Alexander, it is destiny reborn. As the sun rises over Babylon, its light floods through the palace windows, casting the shadow of Alexander across the great map. His silhouette covers all, Greece, Persia, Egypt, India, and stops only where the parchment ends. He smiles. "Not yet," he murmurs. "The world is not yet finished." The torches dim. The music fades. The desert waits. Dawn rises over Babylon, not gently, but like the opening of an eye that has seen eternity. The city stirs beneath its golden haze. Bells toll from temple towers, and the air carries the mingled scent of incense, oil, and dust. At the palace gates, Alexander's army assembles, tens of thousands strong, Macedonian veterans hardened by decades of war, Persian cavalrymen adorned in bright silk, Indian mahouts guiding elephants clad in bronze, and Greek engineers readying their siege wagons. No longer a single nation's army, but a microcosm of the known world, bound by one man's will. Narrator, V.O. The streets overflow with citizens, Persians, Babylonians, Greeks, Jews, Egyptians, all gathered to witness what few believe possible. They had seen their king conquer the world. Now they will see him challenge the very horizon itself. The royal procession begins. At its center rides Alexander, bareheaded, dressed not in gold, but in the simple armor of a Macedonian soldier. His cloak of crimson silk drapes lightly across his shoulders, his face calm, unreadable, the face of a man who has seen death and chosen to outpace it. Beside him marches Ptolemy, the scholar general, carrying scrolls and astrolabes, tools for mapping the unknown. Seleucus rides further behind, commanding the cavalry, while Nearchus oversees the ships being built along the Euphrates, vessels destined to follow the army by river and sea. For Alexander dreams not only of conquering Arabia, but of sailing around it. Behind them, the palace gates close slowly. For many, it is the last they will ever see of Babylon, that great heart of empire, that dream of stone and water. As the gates seal shut, the echo lingers, a sound like the closing of a chapter in history itself. The army moves southward along the plains, where the Euphrates glitters like molten glass under the rising sun. Caravans of camels follow, burdened with grain, wine, and water sealed in clay jars. Elephants march in solemn rhythm, shaking the earth with each step. Phalanxes of Macedonian veterans chant in unison, their spears a forest of bronze, and in between them, priests and seers walk barefoot, whispering prayers to every god they know. For in the desert to come, even the divine will be tested. Everywhere banners ripple in the hot wind, blue for Macedonia, gold for Persia, and a new standard, the circle of the sun, Alexander's personal emblem, symbol of eternity. From the walls of Babylon, thousands stand in silence. Women raise their children to see the departing army. Old men bow their heads. Priests burn incense upon the terraces, their smoke rising in thin, trembling columns, a farewell to the conqueror who became their god. Atop the Ishtar gate, a single figure remains, a Babylonian astrologer, robes tattered by the wind. He watches until the army fades into the shimmering horizon, then turns away, whispering to the wind. When the eagle flies beyond the sun, even the gods cannot follow. Beyond the fertile plains, the land begins to change. The earth dries, cracks, and turns to red dust. Grass gives way to gravel, then to sand. The wind grows dry, its breath sharp with salt and silence. The horizon stretches endless and white, the sun a relentless god that spares no living thing. Still, the army marches. Their footsteps form a line that will outlast memory, a road written not in stone, but in endurance. In the heat, hallucinations become companions. Men see temples rising from dunes, rivers glimmering that vanish when reached. Yet Alexander never falters. He rides ahead of them all, eyes fixed upon the southern sky, as though reading omens invisible to mortal sight. Day after day, the army's rhythm becomes a living machine. At dawn, horns sound, tents collapse in waves, fires are smothered, leaving only trails of smoke in the wind. By midday, the column shimmers like a mirage, its front lost in heat haze, its end invisible beyond the dust. The desert becomes an ocean. Its dunes rise and fall like waves, its winds roar like surf against invisible shores. At night, the stars emerge in terrible clarity, a sea of light across the black dome of heaven. Here, Alexander finds new constellations, patterns no Greek had ever named. He orders his scribes to record them, believing they are signs from the gods guiding his path. In the heavens, he says, there are no borders, so there shall be none on earth. Weeks pass, water grows scarce, the sun becomes merciless, turning armor to fire and skin to ash. Men begin to fall, first from exhaustion, then despair. Yet no one dares speak of turning back. One evening, when the winds die and the heat hangs thick, a soldier collapses before Alexander's horse. The king dismounts, kneels beside him, and offers the last drop from his own flask. The man trembles, unable to drink. He weeps, not from thirst, but from reverence. Word of this act spreads through the camp like wildfire. And for days afterward, men march not for gold nor glory, but for the man who shared their thirst. For in that gesture, they no longer followed a king. They followed a myth reborn in human form. Every night, the desert hums with strange music. The creak of leather, the sigh of sand, the whisper of wind across the armor of sleeping men. Alexander sits apart from the fires, his gaze fixed upon the horizon, where the stars meet the dunes like sparks on an anvil. He thinks not of war, but of legacy. Of the cities he has founded, Alexandria in Egypt, in the Indus, in the mountains of Bactria, and the new one he dreams to raise in Arabia, a city not of conquest, but of connection. He begins to imagine an empire woven together, from Athens to Babylon, from India to the edge of the sea, a single fabric of knowledge, trade, and peace. He believes, perhaps truly, that if he can conquer the last horizon, he can also conquer the nature of mankind itself. The days blur into one another. Sunrise and sunset become the same color, the color of fire reflected in dust. Men march in silence now, their movements automatic, their faith carrying them forward. And then, at last, they crest a high dune. Before them, the desert breaks, revealing an endless expanse of white sand and blue sky. At its far edge, faint as a dream, the shimmer of water, an oasis or a mirage. Alexander halts, raising his hand. The army stops behind him. The wind dies, and in that stillness, the world itself seems to hold its breath. He turns to his generals and smiles. "The gods have tested us," he says, "and we have not been found wanting." The march continues. In their hearts, they no longer march for conquest. They march for meaning, for the chance to follow a man who has outrun death itself and who now walks, step by step, into legend. The Arabian sands are unlike any Alexander has ever known. Here the sun does not simply rise. It devours. It climbs the sky like a golden predator, stripping color from the world until all that remains is blinding light and shadow. The wind moans across dunes older than memory, carrying whispers of forgotten gods. The horizon bends and shatters under heat so fierce it warps vision itself. The air tastes of metal and salt. Every breath burns. Day after day the army marches, a river of men turned to dust. Their bronze armor scorches to the touch. Their sandals sink into sands that boil beneath them. Each step forward feels like rebellion against death. Even the great war elephants, those mighty beasts who once crushed the armies of India, now groan like dying titans. Their eyes dull, their skin cracks. The horses stumble. Men mutter prayers in tongues long since forgotten by their comrades. Persians, Macedonians, Egyptians, united now not by conquest, but by thirst. The water grows scarce. The rivers of Babylon are a dream. Canteens run dry, and lips split open in silence. Some drink sand in their sleep. Others curse the gods that have followed them across the world. But Alexander does not falter. He rides at the front, bareheaded beneath the burning sky, refusing shade, refusing ease. His hair is caked with dust, his lips cracked, yet his eyes remain fierce, twin flames in a wasteland of despair. They say a man's faith is tested in fire. Alexander's is tested in light, for there are no shadows left to hide in here, only truth, laid bare beneath the sun. One by one, soldiers begin to fall. Some sink to their knees and never rise. Others stagger, delirious, whispering the names of their homes, their wives, their gods. A Persian standard-bearer collapses, the banner falling slowly like a dying flame. No one stops. There is no time. There is only forward. Narrator, VO. At night, the desert changes its face. The inferno cools to black ice, and the stars spill across the heavens like a million watchful eyes. The sand, once blazing white, now glows with faint silver light, a sea of glass beneath the cold moon. And in that stillness, Alexander rides apart from his men, alone, always alone. His shadow stretches long across the dunes. The wind hisses softly around him, like voices just beyond understanding. He lifts his gaze to the constellations, bright, unblinking, cruel. They are the same stars that guided him from Macedon to Egypt, the same that watched him cross the Hindu Kush, the same that bore silent witness to his victories at Issus, Tyre, and Gaugamela. But here, beneath this pitiless sky, they seem different, colder, more distant. Even the heavens feel weary. He remembers Aristotle's words, "To know the world is to know the divine order within it." Alexander whispers to the stars, his voice barely a breath, "Then I must see it all." The words vanish into the night, carried away by the wind. He closes his eyes, and for a moment, just a moment, he imagines he can hear the voice of his old teacher again, the calm tone of reason, the promise of understanding. the weight of destiny unfulfilled. Each dawn rises harder than the last. The men wake shivering from the cold, and soon begin to sweat beneath the new sun's cruelty. Rations run low. Their skin peels. Their minds fracture between hallucination and memory. One soldier swears he saw a river ahead, clear and blue as Macedon's lakes, but it vanishes as they approach. Another insists he saw a woman's face in the dunes, smiling before crumbling into sand. The desert mocks them, shaping mirages from desire and despair alike. The line between dream and death grows thin, and still Alexander presses on. His conviction hardens with every loss. To him, each hardship is a sacrament, each death a brick in the monument of his eternal name. His generals beg him to turn back. Craterus reminds him of their men, of their future, of Babylon, their empire's beating heart. But Alexander only looks southward, eyes fixed on a horizon that seems to recede as he advances. He smiles faintly, as if seeing something they cannot, something only the gods would dare to imagine. He tells them, "When the body is broken, the soul is revealed." They march on. Behind him, silence stretches unbroken, but for the crunch of boots and the whisper of shifting sands. Men collapse, camels perish. But no one questions him again. The fire of his will burns brighter than the desert sun. They follow, because to stop is to die, and to die without him is worse than death itself. The desert becomes a crucible, a place where men are stripped of all illusions, of comfort, of fear, of mercy. Here Alexander ceases to be merely a conqueror. He becomes something else, a pilgrim, a seeker walking the border between man and myth. Each step forward is not toward a new land, but toward revelation. And in that endless sea of dust and light, under stars that do not blink, the world's greatest king meets his greatest adversary, not Persia, not India, not rebellion, but the silence of the void itself. And through that silence, he hears it, the faint echo of his own heartbeat. Steady, unyielding, eternal. Weeks pass in endless heat and silence. The desert has no mercy left to give, only indifference. Men march like shadows through a white void, their armor crusted with salt, their lips cracked, their eyes dulled. The horizon shimmers eternally ahead, always retreating, always mocking. And then, on a night when all hope seems spent, the moon rises full and cold. Its silver light spills across the dunes like a river of glass. A whisper moves through the ranks, first disbelief, then wonder. Before them, nestled in a hollow of sand, lies something impossible. Water, real water, glistening pools reflecting the stars. Palm trees swaying gently in a wind that carries the scent of flowers unseen for weeks. An oasis, a dream carved from the bones of the earth. For a long moment, no one moves. The soldiers simply stare, afraid it might vanish like the mirages before. Then one man runs forward, another follows, and suddenly the silence breaks. Shouts, laughter, sobs. The sound of life rushing back into men who had already begun to die. They fall to their knees in the cool shallows, drinking, weeping, praying. Some kiss the ground. Others just lie back and let the water close around them, eyes to the sky, as if baptized anew. Alexander dismounts slowly. His horse snorts softly, exhausted. He stands still, letting the night wind brush his face. Then, without a word, he steps into the pool and lets the water wash over his legs. For the first time in months, he closes his eyes, not in pain or prayer, but in something close to peace. Here, in this forgotten cradle of the desert, Alexander gives an order. A city will be founded, not merely as shelter, but as symbol. He names it Alexandria of the Moon. By torchlight, engineers set to work. They mark the foundations with chalk and stone. Mathematicians pace the sands, measuring stars and shadows. The architects, their faces still blistered by sun, speak of aqueducts and courtyards, of markets shaded by palm and marble colonnades. Soldiers, too weak to march, dig the first wells with trembling hands. The sound of picks and shovels rises in rhythm with the night insects. A city, born not from conquest, but from survival. Alexander walks among them, watching by the silver light of the moon. He touches the rough pillars that mark the first streets, smiles faintly at the geometric symmetry. For a moment, he is not a conqueror, not a god, not even a king. He is simply a man building a home in the vastness of the unknown. Philosophers record the stars that shine above this newfound city. They note constellations unseen in Greece, strange configurations of light that seem to form the shapes of beasts and chariots unknown. To them, this place is more than an oasis. It is a mirror between worlds, between east and west, heaven and earth, mortality and myth. Alexander dictates that the city be built in a perfect circle, a symbol of eternity, of the cosmos itself. Its walls shall face the rising moon, its streets aligned with the stars. At its center, a temple to Selene, goddess of the moon, will stand beside an altar to Zeus Ammon, as if Greek and Babylonian gods might at last meet under one silver sky. He names this harmony syncretia, the unity of all faiths under the light of reason. Here, philosophy and divinity shall speak as one. Around the campfires, the soldiers whisper of omens. They say they have been led here not by chance, but by divine will. That this oasis is the womb of a new world, a place where East and West shall finally clasp hands, where trade and knowledge will flow like twin rivers, and in the maps of history that never were, Arabia becomes the hinge upon which the world turns. Alexander stands upon a dune overlooking the work. Below him, torches flicker across the sands like constellations come to earth. The air is cool now, the desert no longer hostile but hushed, reverent, as though watching its conqueror with quiet awe. He looks up at the moon, full, radiant, endless. It stares back cold and calm, as if acknowledging him. He whispers to it, "You have guided me through darkness. Let this city bear your name," and so under the moon's white eye, a city of stone and light begins to rise from the desert. A city that should have been Alexandria of the moon. The final breath of a dream that might have changed the world forever. The desert, to most men, is silence. To Alexander, it is a living kingdom, vast, proud, eternal. Yet even he does not fully understand it. For weeks his army moves through seas of gold, where mirages ripple like ghosts and dunes hum beneath the wind. They follow ancient paths worn smooth by generations of caravans, routes older than Greece, older even than Babylon. At night, the campfires flicker like stars scattered across the sands, and the soldiers speak of strange kingdoms that worship no god they know. Rumors drift among them, of a people untouched by empire, rich beyond imagining, whose caravans carry incense and myrrh, frankincense for the temples of Egypt and Jerusalem, and spices for the tables of Persia and India. Their capital, it is said, glows with lamps of silver oil and gardens suspended above wells deeper than thought. Alexander listens in silence. Each tale of wealth and defiance strikes like a spark against his ambition. But there is something else in him now. not the fever of conquest, but the curiosity of a man seeking meaning beyond victory. And so the march continues, past bones of camels long dead, past shattered amphorae left by forgotten traders, past the faint scent of myrrh lingering in the wind. At last, scouts return with word. The mountains rise ahead, sharp as blades. Here in the high valleys of the western sands stand the Sabaeans, guardians of the incense route, a civilization hidden between cliffs, carved from red stone and guarded by silence. Their banners glint in the sun, woven of gold thread and perfumed silk. Their warriors ride white camels armored in bronze. Their poets sing of gods who dwell not in heaven, but in the heart of the desert itself. They do not fear the Macedonian. They have seen empires rise and vanish like the morning dew. When Alexander's envoys approach, bearing gifts of silver, words of peace, and promises of alliance, they are met not with reverence, but with laughter carried on the wind. And the Sabaean chief, an old man with eyes like polished obsidian, replies, "You have conquered men." But the desert bows to no king. At dawn, the horizon burns red. Sandstorms roll like thunderclouds across the valley. The wind howls through the ravines, and the scent of burning incense fills the air, a sacred fire, a warning, a prayer. Alexander rides at the head of his phalanx unarmored, his cloak snapping like a flame behind him. He knows this will not be a war of nations, but of will, the immortal pride of empire against the eternal defiance of the sands. The first arrows rise like black birds from the ridges. They vanish into the glare and fall among the Macedonians with deadly whisper. The enemy moves like the desert itself, appearing, striking, vanishing again. No line holds, no formation stands. For the first time in years, Alexander feels something he has not known since Gaugamela: fear. He shouts commands over the roar of wind and steel. The phalanx tightens, the cavalry wheels, but the dunes themselves seem alive, shifting, collapsing, swallowing men whole. The enemy rides through smoke and storm as if born of it, their robes blending with the dust, their blades flashing like sunlight on glass. Hours pass in chaos. The world becomes sand, blood, and the cry of trumpets lost in the gale. Alexander's horse collapses beneath him, struck by an arrow. He rises, draws his sword, and leads the charge on foot, his voice cutting through the storm. Forward, the gods are watching. By noon, the wind begins to die. The air is thick with the scent of sweat and ash. The dunes glow red as if aflame. Alexander stands at the center of the battlefield, his armor shattered, his face streaked with sand and blood. The Sabaean chief rides toward him, his robes torn, his eyes unyielding. They meet not as conqueror and rebel, but as equals. The silence between them weighs heavier than the heat. Then, the chief lowers his spear, not in surrender, but in salute. You have faced the desert and not fled, so you are welcome to pass through it. No treaty is written, no tribute is demanded. But the incense road opens to Alexander, not through conquest, but through respect. That night, as the soldiers rest beside dwindling fires, Alexander walks alone into the dunes. The moon hangs low, casting silver over endless silence. He feels the grains beneath his feet, ancient, patient, unyielding. For the first time, he understands what it means to face something that cannot be conquered. The Sabaeans had fought not for land or gold, but for the right to remain themselves. And in that defiance, Alexander sees a reflection of his own soul, the same unbending flame, but turned toward a different horizon. He kneels, lets the sand slip through his fingers, and whispers to the night. Perhaps the gods live not on Olympus, but here, where men stand unbroken. The wind answers with a sigh, and for the first time in years, the conqueror feels peace. He will ride on. He will still seek the ends of the world. But something within him has shifted, the hunger for glory giving way to the reverence for endurance. And as dawn breaks over the red mountains of Arabia, Alexander smiles, for he knows that even if the desert will never bow to a king, it has at last taught him to kneel before eternity. The desert had been silent for days, eerily, almost respectfully silent. Even the wind seemed to kneel before the Macedonian king. But in the silence, something vast was stirring. The air thickened, heavy with the scent of iron and dust. The horizon dimmed to the color of rust, and then a murmur began. At first it was the faint whistle of shifting dunes. Then it grew, layer upon layer, until it became a roar so deep it seemed to rise from the bones of the earth. Men froze mid-step. Camels stamped nervously, and Alexander, standing at the center of his camp, lifted his face to the sky and whispered, almost with wonder, "The desert speaks." It came without mercy, a wall of red sand and darkness that devoured the horizon. The sky and ground blurred together. Day collapsed into night. The storm rose like an army of gods unleashed, wind howling like 10,000 chariots, sand cutting through flesh and cloth like knives. Tents were ripped from their stakes and hurled into the void. Fires were extinguished, torches smothered, voices swallowed whole by the shrieking wind. Men shouted prayers to Zeus, to Ra, to Ahura Mazda, to whatever god might listen. But the storm answered with only thunder and blindness. The air itself became a weapon, a living thing made of fury and dust. It clawed at eyes, tore through lungs, filled mouths with the taste of salt and grit and fear. Horses broke their tethers and vanished into the void. Bronze shields clanged and rolled across the sand, their echoes lost in the storm's roar. And amid the chaos, Alexander refused to retreat. He stood outside his tent, cloak whipping violently around him, eyes narrowed against the storm. To his men, he looked not mortal, but carved from the tempest itself, a figure of dust and defiance. "No man conquers the desert," he shouted into the void, "until he walks through it." Hours bled into days. The sun disappeared. The desert became a world without color, without sound, but for the scream of the storm. Men tied ropes between tents to avoid being lost in the blindness. They buried supplies in pits to keep them from being carried away. Water turned to mud. Faces became masks of clay and despair. Some whispered that the gods were angry. Others said the spirits of the Sabaeans had cursed the invaders. Still others, the philosophers, the skeptics, fell silent, for there were no words that could explain such fury. Within his tent, Alexander sat motionless, a single candle flickering before him, its flame bending in every gust. He stared into it, as if divining fate itself. To his generals, he appeared calm, but within him raged a storm far greater than any wind outside. Was this the end? Had his ambition finally called down divine wrath? Or was this yet another test, the kind that separates men from myths? He thought of his father, Philip, of Olympus and the prophecies whispered in his youth. He thought of the oracles at Siwa, who had called him son of Zeus. And he wondered, had he come this far only to die beneath a sea of sand? Outside, his soldiers prayed through cracked lips. Others lay in exhaustion, their faces buried in cloaks, their tears indistinguishable from the grains that covered them. On the third night, the storm reached its peak. The sky vanished completely, a void of swirling crimson and black. Lightning cracked across the heavens, illuminating the dunes like waves frozen in mid-collapse. It was then that Alexander stepped from his tent and vanished into the storm. No one saw him go. Only a few heard the faint sound of his voice carried by the wind, a single command. "Hold the line." They searched for him when the storm began to break, but the wind was too fierce. All landmarks had vanished. Time lost meaning. Days became one long, blind moment of survival. By the dawn of the fourth day, the storm began to fade. The sun rose pale and cold over a desert transformed. Dunes flattened, camps half buried, the living and the dead scattered alike beneath new sands. And then, they found him. Half buried beneath a dune, Alexander lay motionless, his cloak torn, his armor dulled by dust. For a terrible moment, his men thought him dead. But as they brushed the sand from his face, his eyes opened, clear, burning, alive. He sat up slowly, sand streaming from his hair and beard, and gazed around the transformed desert. In his hand, he held a small mound of sand, gripping it as though it were gold. And then, he laughed. A deep, wild laugh that carried across the stillness. His generals stood in disbelief. They saw not a man returned from death, but something more. A being both broken and reborn. Alexander rose, turned to the horizon, and said softly, "The desert has tested us and found us worthy." When night fell again, the camp was silent. The men worked to rebuild what the storm had taken, but their movements were different, slower, reverent, uncertain. They had walked through death and returned. They had seen their king vanish into the storm and rise again. Some called it a miracle. Others whispered that he had spoken with the gods. But none doubted now that Alexander's destiny had turned once more, that the desert had not tried to destroy him, but to forge him anew. He stood that night atop a dune, the wind soft now, carrying only whispers. Stars emerged through the thinning clouds, distant, cold, eternal. He looked to them and in the silence murmured to himself, "If the desert can live forever, why not I?" The wind answered with a sigh, and somewhere far beyond the dunes, thunder rolled like the laughter of unseen gods. By the spring of his 44th year, Alexander reaches the southern rim of the world, a coast whispered of in Greek legend, where the land melts into the sea, and the air smells of myrrh and unknown flowers. The army stands at the edge of the Arabian Sea, a boundless horizon of turquoise and silver. Here, the conqueror lays down his sword and raises a compass. He chooses a crescent of coastline where dunes slope gently into calm waters. "Here," he says, "the gods have drawn a harbor with their own hands." And so begins the foundation of Alexandria, Arabia, the city where East and West will meet not in war, but in understanding. Engineers trace vast curves of stone piers reaching into the sea, each designed to mirror the waxing and waning of the moon. Masons from Egypt and Persia labor side by side, their hammers singing the first rhythm of unity. They carve channels through coral and limestone, creating harbors deep enough for the ships of India. From Babylon, architects bring scrolls of geometry and tide measurement. From Tyre come sailors who read the stars as maps. On the first hill above the bay, Alexander orders a temple built, not to a single god, but to all gods who watch the sea. One column rises to Poseidon, carved from blue marble that catches the dawn like flame. Another bears the crescent of Sin, the moon god of Arabia. Between them, the sacred fire of Ahura Mazda burns eternal, its light mingling with the salt wind and the scent of incense. This is no longer the dream of a Greek king. It is the dream of a world reborn, a city not of conquest, but of connection. Soon, the sound of construction gives way to the hum of life. The first market rises at the city's heart, a vast, shaded plaza where voices mix like music. Persian traders unfurl silk beside Greek olive oil. Arab caravans bring frankincense, gold, and salt. Indian sailors barter pepper, ivory, and wisdom. Here, for the first time, the languages of empire blend: Greek, Aramaic, Sanskrit, Arabic, spoken not in defiance, but in trade, laughter, and song. A philosopher from Athens debates the nature of eternity with a priest from Saba. A mathematician from Babylon sketches the curve of a ship's hull on clay, and above them all, banners of blue and gold flutter with a new symbol: two wings joined at the heart. Alexander's emblem of unity. In the evenings, Alexander walks among the scaffolds barefoot, his armor replaced by a simple cloak, his hands dusted with lime and sand. He listens to builders argue in tongues he cannot always understand, and smiles. He is no longer commanding destruction, he is commanding creation. When the workers falter, he lifts stones beside them. When they fear the tides, he dives into the surf himself, testing the depth, laughing as salt water crashes against his chest. To his soldiers, this sight is stranger than any battle. The man who once set cities aflame now raises them from dust and tide. On the city's northern edge, Alexander orders the founding of a great hall, half temple, half library. Its shelves will hold not only scrolls of philosophy and war, but records of tides, stars, and winds. He names it the Thalassarium, the Hall of the Sea. Here, Babylonian astronomers teach navigation to Phoenician captains. Greek philosophers study the constellations described by Indian sages. Scrolls in many scripts, Greek, Old Persian, Akkadian, Sanskrit, are copied and stored together under one roof. The sea, Alexander says, is the page of the earth. Every wave, a line of text written by the gods. When the harbor nears completion, Alexander calls for a festival, the festival of two suns. At dawn, torches light across the city, their flames mirrored in the calm sea. Musicians play from ships anchored offshore, their drums echoing like heartbeats against the cliffs. As the sun rises from the east, its rays strike the temples of Poseidon and Sin, and for one brief, perfect moment, their shadows merge across the plaza. Alexander watches in silence. Tears glimmer on his face, caught between sunlight and wind. Now, he whispers, the gods have spoken the same language. Alexander knows his campaigns have scarred the earth. But here, at the world's edge, he feels something shift within him, a peace deeper than triumph. He stands before the sea, and the waves reflect the fire of his own restlessness. He speaks softly to Hephaestion's memory. If only you could see this, a city where no one kneels, where every tongue and god has a place. The wind answers only with the cry of seabirds. Months pass, the city grows, harbors bustling with ships from lands once divided by war. The scent of incense mingles with the smell of olive oil and tar. Children born of many nations run along the docks, their laughter echoing across the marble. Alexander's dream has taken root, not on a battlefield, but in the gentle rhythm of trade, in the mingling of prayers at sunset, in the quiet dignity of builders working beneath a shared sky. From a conqueror's hand has come a bridge across worlds, and though he does not yet know it, this city, this Alexandria, Arabia, will outlive his empire. long after the bronze of his statues has turned green with age and the banners of Macedon have faded to dust, its harbors will still welcome ships, its markets will still speak in many tongues, and its people will still look east to the rising sun, and remember the man who dreamed of one world. And so, upon the rim of the desert and the sea, Alexander founds not a monument to conquest, but a testament to connection. A city not built to mark his victories, but to hold the future. The journey back to Babylon is unlike any march before. It is not a campaign of conquest, but a procession of wonder, a pilgrimage through the living map of his empire. The army that left as warriors returns as pilgrims, carrying not spoils, but stories. Stories of mountains that sang at dawn, of tribes who spoke of gods that walked among men, of rivers that turned to mirrors at sunset. They have crossed the Arabian sands, those endless dunes where the wind itself whispers of eternity. They have carved roads through silence, raised altars where once only starlight reigned. Arabia was not conquered, it was illuminated, its myths translated into the universal language of empire. When they finally reach the fertile plains near Babylon, the Euphrates gleams like liquid bronze under the morning sun. The air smells of grain, of rain-soaked clay, of life. Messengers ride ahead to announce his return, and Babylon, heart of the world, awakens. The gates open, and from tower to temple, the city explodes in a fever of celebration. From balconies and rooftops, flowers rain down like golden hail. Priests chant hymns to Zeus Ammon, calling Alexander the son of heaven and earth. Drums echo through the streets, and the people shout his name, not in one tongue, but in many. Greek, Aramaic, Persian, Egyptian. It is as though the languages themselves have surrendered, fusing into one sound, Alexander, a word that no longer belongs to man or myth, but to history itself. He rides through the city on horseback, his armor glinting in the low sun, his cloak fluttering like a banner of flame. Children run alongside him, merchants kneel, soldiers salute, and all around him, the marble walls are lined with tapestries depicting his conquests, Egypt, Persia, India. But now, new ones are being woven, depicting Arabia, the last horizon he dared to touch. Yet as the cheers rise higher, a single thought burns in the stillness of his heart. He has seen the edges of the world, and the world did not end. That night, Babylon becomes a star reborn. Every garden blooms with firelight and music. Tables stretch for miles, silver goblets overflowing with wine, golden platters gleaming beneath torchlight. The scent of saffron and roasted lamb fills the air. Persian nobles, Greek philosophers, Egyptian priests, and Arabian emissaries dine together under the same canopy of silk. It is the world, united in one feast. Alexander sits at the center, a living axis around which all nations turn. Beside him, maps of his empire are spread across marble tables, the work of his geographers, who now struggle to fit the earth within its borders. He laughs, lifting his cup, his eyes bright with the fire of unending dreams. To the next horizon, he toasts. But even as he speaks, a hush passes among his oldest companions. They have seen that look before, the gaze that turns victory into obsession, dream into destiny, and destiny into doom. Later, when the music fades and the guests disperse, he walks alone in the hanging gardens. Moonlight shimmers across the terraces. The air hums with the scent of jasmine and myrrh. Below him, the city glows like a living constellation, Babylon reborn under his hand. He gazes over the river, where distant lights flicker like embers drifting on water. Each flame represents a city, a people, a life touched by his will. He wonders if this is what gods feel, this quiet weight of infinite creation. But from the shadows, an old voice returns. The voice of Aristotle, long buried in his youth. Man may strive to be godlike, but even gods are bound by limits. Alexander smiles faintly. Then I will build new limits, he whispers to the stars. In that whisper lies the seed of the shadow. For every empire that touches the heavens must one day cast a long and terrible fall. He no longer dreams of mere dominion. He dreams of divinity. If the gods have shaped the world, then he shall reshape it. If the gods command the stars, then he shall send ships to find their edge. The philosophers who once guided him now struggle to temper his vision. The generals who once feared his wrath now fear his immortality. The line between man and myth is dissolving, and Babylon itself begins to tremble beneath his ambition. In the months that follow, Alexander transforms Babylon into something the world has never seen. He orders canals to link the rivers to the sea, shipyards to construct vessels larger than any before, and towers to scrape the heavens. Temples of every god are rebuilt, not as rivals, but as allies in one divine architecture. He speaks of a universal empire, not ruled by the sword, but by the harmony of all cultures. He dreams of a council of philosophers to write the laws of the future, a parliament of humanity. And for a brief, impossible moment, the dream feels within reach. Yet beneath the marble and music, the whispers grow. Omens appear, a serpent coiled in his chamber, a falcon that refuses to fly, a storm that breaks over the river at dawn. The priests warn of imbalance. His old comrades speak of exhaustion. The gods, perhaps, have grown jealous. But Alexander, illuminated by the fire of vision, cannot see the shadow that walks beside him. He believes himself the chosen one, the bridge between mortal and divine, the son of thunder who will outlive the world itself. He does not yet know that the gods do not bless without cost. The empire breathes. From the gates of Babylon to the marble colonnades of Alexandria, from the mountain citadels of Bactria to the salt-swept harbors of the Red Sea, a strange stillness settles. The stillness that only follows after creation. The roads pulse with merchants and pilgrims, silk from India, gold from Nubia, ivory from the Horn of Africa, all flow toward Babylon, the heart of Alexander's world. In every port, his name is whispered not as conqueror, but as architect of eternity. His statues stand in marketplaces. His edicts are carved in Greek beside Egyptian, Aramaic, and Sanskrit. The languages of humanity have begun to merge. The dream that began in blood has become a living system of light. And yet, for the man who built it, peace feels like exile. Dawn creeps across the Euphrates like molten gold. In the royal palace, the air is thick with incense and the murmur of servants preparing the day. Tapestries depict his victories, Issus, Gaugamela, the Indus, their threads glimmering in the slanted sunlight. But Alexander does not look at them. He stands barefoot upon the cold marble floor, a lion skin draped over his shoulders, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Outside his window, Babylon stirs, temple bells echo across the river. Traders shout in half a dozen tongues. Children run between the columns chasing a wooden ball. It is the hum of life, vast, unending. And yet to him, it sounds like still water over buried flame. In the great hall of maps, Mosaic floors shimmer like captured seas. Here he walks alone at night, the walls painted with the known world, the floor inlaid with rivers of silver and mountains of lapis. He runs his fingers along the painted edges of the Mediterranean, where the map fades into pale, uncharted parchment. He lingers there, tracing the emptiness. His generals believe the world has been conquered. But to Alexander, the uncolored corners mock him. They whisper of unfinished destiny. He whispers back, "The gods do not rest, and neither shall I." He remembers the desert winds of Arabia, the voices of his sailors as they gazed west across the sea, wondering what lands might lie beyond. The thought burns brighter each night. The world, he feels, has not ended, only paused, waiting for him to move again. Across the empire, his name has become more than mortal. In Egypt, they call him son of Ammon. In Persia, lord of the four quarters. In India, the thunder who walks. Priests debate whether his soul has already crossed into the divine. But Alexander feels no divinity, only silence. The silence that comes when the drums of war fall quiet, and a man hears his own thoughts echo too loudly. He attends festivals and ceremonies. He presides over councils where scholars speak of philosophy, engineers of canals, and astronomers of stars. Yet his mind drifts. When others see peace, he sees incompletion. When others see empire, he sees the cage of success. He dines with his old companions, Ptolemy, Seleucus, and Hephaestion. But even among them, the laughter feels distant. They are aging. Their eyes have lost the fever of youth. Only Alexander still burns. At night, sleep brings no rest. He dreams of waves, endless waves, the western sea devouring the horizon in silver fire. In the dream, he stands upon a cliff, his hands stretched toward the sun as it sinks. A voice calls from the water, soft, ancient, familiar. It is not Zeus nor Ammon, nor any god he has known. It is destiny, whispering, "You have not yet reached the end." He wakes before dawn, breathless, and orders his scribes to bring maps of Libya, Sicily, and Iberia. He begins to compare the lands he has conquered with those still beyond his reach. The East has given him wisdom and divinity. The West, he believes, will grant him immortality. He studies reports from explorers and traders, the riches of Carthage, the strange discipline of Rome, the wild tribes of Iberia, and the misty isles where the ocean swallows the sun. To his mind, these are not frontiers, they are invitations. He sees the Mediterranean not as a barrier, but a bridge. He envisions a chain of cities encircling it, each a jewel of learning, each bound by the flame of Hellenic light. He names the vision in his journals, the empire of the two suns, for one rises from the east he has mastered, and the other burns in the west, waiting to be tamed. One morning, as dawn spills gold over the river, Alexander ascends the palace terraces. The air is cool and fragrant with cedar. He walks alone to the edge, his eyes fixed where the desert meets the sky. The guards bow, but he does not see them. He watches the sun rise, each ray flashing across the bronze shields of the city below. The Euphrates glows like molten fire. He murmurs softly, "I have bound the east to the light. Now I must bind the west to the flame." A falcon sweeps low across the water, a sign perhaps from the gods, perhaps from the restless sky itself. Behind him, the empire waits, a giant breathing in slumber, its heart pulsing with the rhythm of trade and hope. But within the man who built it, another pulse begins, the rhythm of restless creation, the drumbeat that no peace can silence. Empires die in comfort. Only movement keeps them alive. And so Alexander, architect of the world, turned once more to the uncharted, not because he had to, but because creation itself demanded it. The world has grown vast again, and somewhere beyond the western horizon, destiny waits for his return. The winds of spring carry the scent of cedar and pitch through the harbors of Tyre and Alexandria. The year is a new dawn in the reign of Alexander, and in this dawn, ships are born like children of prophecy. All along the quays, the air trembles with the hammering of craftsmen and the low chant of shipwrights blessing their work. Massive beams of Lebanese cedar, polished and oiled, glimmer under sunlight as they are shaped into the ribs of vessels unlike any seen before. These are not triremes of war alone. Their hulls are longer, built for endurance, not destruction. Their decks are higher, meant to carry not only warriors, but the minds of empire. The prow of each ship bears a lion's head of gold, its mane engraved with the names of gods and stars. Beneath the gilding, the symbols of Babylon, Egypt, and Macedon intertwine, emblems of a new, united world. When the first rays of dawn strike their painted hulls, white as marble, trimmed in gold, the sailors of Phoenicia whisper in awe, "The fleet of the sun." Alexander walks among the dry docks, silent but burning with purpose. He watches as engineers and philosophers argue over sails, rudders, and star charts. The smell of tar, salt, and metal fills the air, a symphony of creation. He has commanded that this fleet not be made of warships alone, but of knowledge itself. For this new voyage is not to conquer by sword, but to map, to learn, to bind the edges of the earth into one vast whole. To every vessel, he assigns philosophers, astronomers, geographers, linguists, and poets. He wants the sea to carry civilization itself, a floating academy, a moving city of thought. And so, amid the hammering and chanting, you hear another sound, the low murmur of scholars debating over maps and constellations, scribes testing the language of distant tribes, poets setting their verses to the rhythm of oars. For Alexander, this is no longer conquest. It is creation, the empire reborn as a living mind. At dusk, the harbor glows with thousands of torches. The water itself seems to burn as flames reflect across the tide. The first completed ships slide down their ramps into the sea, each christened with a libation of wine and olive oil. The crowd cheers as the great flagship, Helios Invictus, the unconquered sun, touches water for the first time. Her sails are woven with threads of gold. Her figurehead is a lion crowned with laurels. At the stern, a marble plaque bears an inscription in both Greek and Egyptian, "To the world as one." Behind her float the Artemis of Rhodes, the Isis of the Delta, the Zephyr and the Phoenix, names chosen to bind gods and nations into one pantheon of progress. And upon their decks walk men and women of every land Alexander has touched. Greek mathematicians beside Persian astronomers, Egyptian priests beside Babylonian engineers. It is a sight no world has ever seen, an army not of conquest, but of enlightenment. Before the assembled fleet, Alexander stands on a high stone platform overlooking the harbor. His voice carries across the waves, steady, fierce, and full of wonder. When I first marched east, I sought victory. But victory fades like the smoke of battle. What endures is knowledge. What binds men is understanding. The world itself must become a city, and the sea, our marble road. His generals exchange glances, uncertain whether this is strategy or madness. But the crowd roars, swept up in his vision. The torches flare brighter. The air seems to tremble. As dawn breaks, the trumpets sound from the walls of Alexandria. Thousands gather along the shore, farmers, priests, merchants, soldiers, to witness the birth of the new age. The sea shimmers beneath a pale sun as the fleet unfurls its sails. The white and gold cloth ripples like wings against the horizon. One by one, the ships pull away from the harbor, their oars beating in perfect rhythm, their banners catching the wind. From the flagship, Alexander watches in silence, his cloak caught in the breeze. He raises his hand toward the east, toward the unknown, and whispers a single word lost to the wind. Behind him, the city bells toll. Ahead, the open sea glows like molten glass. The fleet of the sun sails forth, not for war, but for eternity. That night, from the shores of Alexandria, fishermen claim they saw something beyond the edge of sight, the fleet glimmering upon the waters long after sunset, their sails catching the dying light until it seemed as if the very ocean burned with gold. And they said that for 3 days and nights, the western sea itself reflected a new constellation, a chain of bright stars stretching toward the horizon, as if the heavens were guiding mankind's next dream. The sea had become what Alexander had willed, a marble road for the sun. The fleet of the sun turns its sails toward the setting light. The great masts creak as the wind fills their golden fabric, and the horizon stretches wide and endless, a boundless promise painted in blue and fire. Below the decks, sailors chant rhythmically to the pull of oars. Their voices blend with the crash of waves, forming a music older than kingship. The ships hug the coast of Egypt, past white limestone cliffs and dunes that burn like bronze beneath the afternoon sun. Alexander stands upon the prow of the Helios Invictus, his hair whipped by salt wind, his eyes fixed westward. Behind him lies Babylon, the seat of empire. Ahead lies the uncharted, the rim of myth itself. The earth ends not in darkness, he tells his companions, but in light unclaimed. They make landfall near the green mouth of the Nile Delta, where reeds whisper of ancient gods. Priests of Isis greet him with gifts of honey and papyrus. They speak of lands beyond the dunes where the sun sleeps. From there, the fleet sails along the Libyan coast, through waters once ruled by Phoenician merchants, their roots now claimed in the name of unity. The sun beats down like the hammer of Hephaestus, and the horizon trembles in the heat. In Cyrenaica, Alexander orders temples rebuilt, not in the name of a single god, but of all gods joined. Marble columns rise beside sandstone pillars, Greek friezes blend with Egyptian hieroglyphs, and Berber artisans carve their desert suns alongside the Macedonian lion. A new style of art is born, a fusion of desert and sea, east and west, eternity and the present. Let no man say one god ends where another begins, Alexander proclaims before the gathered priests. For the divine is not divided, only named differently. In a vast crescent of golden dunes, where the desert meets the tide, Alexander chooses the site for a new city. He calls it Alexandria by the Sea, the second of his great harbors, to mirror the first that bears his name upon the Nile's edge. The land seems barren, lifeless sand and broken stone. Yet when his engineers drive stakes into the soil, the wind changes, clouds gather, the first rain in months falls upon the desert, softening it into earth. The sailors, awestruck, kneel and murmur that Poseidon himself has blessed the founding. Alexander only smiles faintly and begins drawing lines in the wet sand. The future map of the city, streets laid like sunbeams from a central square, radiating toward the sea. Here, he says softly, the desert shall learn to breathe. Stone by stone, the city rises. Docks extend like arms into the blue. Lighthouses gleam with polished mirrors to guide sailors home. Marketplaces bloom with silk and spice. Philosophers debate under palm shade. Berber traders and Greek scholars share wine and stories of the horizon. At dusk, the city glows red and gold, a mirror of the setting sun. The locals name it the Harbor of Eternity. On the seventh night after the city's founding, Alexander walks alone upon the moonlit beach. The tide crawls around his feet, warm and whispering. Behind him, the campfires of his army flicker like stars scattered upon the earth. He looks westward, toward the dark line of the horizon, and speaks softly to the sea. Show me where your waves end. A sudden gust of wind ripples the surface. The water foams at his feet like breath answering breath. The sailors watching from the dunes swear they saw a faint glow beneath the waves, as though a god stirred in reply. From that night forward, the men say Alexander walks with the favor of Poseidon. Whenever his fleet faces storms, the waves break before his ships like curtains drawn aside. In every port, fishermen whisper his name in reverence. To them, he is no longer just a king, but the son of the sea, the mortal who made a covenant with the horizon. Alexandria by the sea becomes a beacon of unity. Its harbor is filled not with war galleys, but with vessels of trade, study, and faith. The streets echo with many tongues: Greek, Berber, Egyptian, Phoenician, Hebrew, Persian, yet all find common rhythm in the city's markets and temples. The scholars there begin to call it the Symposium of Nations. Astronomers track the southern stars unseen from Greece. Philosophers study the desert's geometry. Healers learn the herbs of Africa and mix them with Eastern medicine. And when night falls, sailors sing to the sea, songs of friendship, courage, and longing, their voices rising into the salt wind. It is here, in this city of light and sand, that Alexander's dream grows beyond empire. He sees for the first time that the conquest of land is finite, but the conquest of ignorance is endless. Months pass. The fleet grows stronger, the ships repaired and resupplied in Alexandria by the sea. Yet Alexander grows restless again. One evening, he climbs the unfinished lighthouse and watches the sun sink into the ocean. The horizon burns crimson, and in that line between sky and water, he sees his reflection in fire. He realizes that his true empire is not built of stone or soldiers, but of the mind, of what mankind might become if it dared to see beyond its own edges. If I die tomorrow, he tells his captains, let my cities not be my monuments. Let them be doors to the unknown. With the city complete, Alexander calls his captains to him. Under banners fluttering in the dawn, he gives the order to set sail once more. As the ships depart, the citizens gather upon the shore, singing hymns of the sea. The great fleet glides westward, their sails catching the first light of morning. From the cliffs, the priests of the new temple watch as the ships vanish into the glare of the horizon. The air is still, save for the soft echo of drums. For centuries after, Berber storytellers would say that when the desert wind blows over the western coast, it carries the sound of those drums, the heartbeat of an empire chasing the sun. The journey across the desert breaks upon a shimmer of gold and salt. After weeks of endless dunes, the merciless horizon, the bones of beasts, the silence of sand, the world opens into a glittering shore. And there it stands, Carthage, a city rising like a mirage from the sea, its towers mirrored in the waves, its harbors a living labyrinth of sails and flame. Spices fill the air. Ivory gleams in the markets. From the hilltop citadel, the banners of Baal Hamon flutter in the desert wind, deep red against the endless blue. Alexander watches from a high ridge, his bronze armor burning under the sunlight. Around him stand his generals, silent in awe. Even they, hardened by a lifetime of conquest, cannot help but whisper, "This is no mere city. This is a kingdom made of trade and time." Carthage is a living empire of merchants and seafarers. Its fleets command the waters from the Pillars of Hercules to the green coasts of Iberia. Its coffers hold more wealth than Babylon, more silver than Persia. And yet, it fears Alexander's shadow. For tales of his march have already crossed the desert, carried by Phoenician traders and trembling envoys. They say the Macedonian god-king has crossed rivers of blood, broken armies of elephants, and spoken with oracles who named him son of Zeus. Now his banners glitter on the edge of the Western world. When Alexander's fleet anchors in the outer harbor, the people of Carthage watch in silence. Their ships, black-sailed and sleek, drift in the bay like panthers among dolphins. Their walls, 30 cubits high, rise sheer from the water. From every tower, braziers burn with orange fire, signals to the city that the conqueror of Asia has come. At sunset, the great council convenes in the temple of Eshmun, whose marble steps descend into the sea. The scent of frankincense mingles with salt air. The counselors, robed in purple and gold, eyes dark as obsidian, await the stranger they have feared and studied for years. And then he enters. Alexander of Macedon. Bareheaded, dust still clinging to his cloak, his face sunburned from the desert wind. There are no trumpets, no legions behind him, only silence and presence, the kind that bends rooms and stills hearts. The counselors rise as one. For a moment, even the sea seems to hush. The eldest among them, Hanno the silver-tongued, merchant prince and keeper of Carthage's fleet, speaks first. "Great king of the East," he says, voice like steel wrapped in silk, "you have crossed the world to find us. What do you seek here? Tribute or trade?" Alexander's answer is calm, measured, and dangerous. "Neither," he says. "I seek the edge of the world, and I find it ruled by men who fear neither sword nor storm." He steps closer, his gaze burning beneath the torches. "You hold the gates of the Western Sea. I hold the keys to the East. Together, we could rule the winds themselves." There is a murmur through the hall, a rustle of fine robes, the creak of golden bracelets. Some counselors lean forward, tempted. Others recoil, seeing in his eyes the ghost of 1,000 ruined kings. For the Carthaginians are no strangers to power. They have bargained with Rome, outwitted Greece, and seen empires rise and fall like tides. They know what it means when a man calls himself divine. For 3 days they speak. By torchlight and starlight, in chambers thick with incense, the two sides trade words sharper than blades. Alexander offers alliance, ships, soldiers, and maps of the Indian Ocean. Carthage counters with gold, ports, and knowledge of Western trade winds that reach lands unseen by Greeks. Behind their courtesies lies a duel of intent. Alexander's dream is to unite the world, not through commerce, but through destiny. Carthage's dream is to rule the world through coin, not conquest, and yet they mirror one another. Both are empires born from the sea, led by visionaries who refuse to kneel before gods or kings. Both believe the world can be remade, by will, by cunning, by fire. In the end, the agreement is fragile, carved from ambition and suspicion alike. A treaty written not in friendship, but in recognition. For even Carthage, with its fleets and fortunes, feels the pull of this man's vision, the gravitational force of a living myth. Before departing, the high priestess of Tanit, veiled in white linen, her voice like a song carried by the tide, offers Alexander a gift, a vial of water drawn from the deepest well of Carthage, said to never dry, even in drought. She says, "Drink when your heart grows weary, and remember, power without patience is thirst without end." Alexander bows. For a heartbeat, he almost smiles. As he leaves the temple, waves crash against the marble steps, spraying silver droplets across his armor. The torches flicker in the salt wind. The stars blaze like polished bronze above the sea. The fleet sails westward at dawn. Behind them, the city glows under a red sky, half shadow, half flame. Carthage remains unconquered, its people still whispering the name of the man who came from the desert and left without war. In that moment, for the first time, Alexander feels the weight of restraint, that conquest need not always be won by the sword, that perhaps the truest victory is knowing when not to strike. The wind rises, the sea opens before him, and as the fleet cuts across the waves toward the unknown, the sun of Africa burns on the horizon, gold, infinite, and waiting. The sea glitters like hammered bronze beneath the western sun, but in Alexander's camp, shadows have begun to stir. The Macedonian tents, stretched along the dunes outside Carthage, flap in the dry wind. The banners of the sun and lion, once proud over Babylon and Persepolis, now hang limp, dulled by salt air and hesitation. It has been many weeks since the treaty with the Carthaginian council, a fragile peace sealed not by oaths of devotion, but by exhaustion. And though the city's harbors bustle with trade, within Alexander's ranks, unease has begun to fester. By torchlight, the generals gather. Their armor gleams in the half-dark, Ptolemy with his measured gaze, Seleucus restless and sharp as drawn steel, Hephaestion silent, eyes fixed on the flicker of flame. They speak softly, as if afraid the desert itself might be listening. Ptolemy's voice is the first to break the stillness. "My king," he says, "you speak of peace as if it were conquest. But Carthage is not Persia. They do not kneel, they bargain. They trade while we wait. Every day they grow richer while our soldiers grow restless." Seleucus adds, "We've seen this before, Alexander. The moment you pause, the moment you trust, rebellion takes root." Their words are respectful, but edged with warning. To men who carved their names into the bones of continents, patience feels like surrender. And yet, to Alexander, it feels like revelation. He listens, his hands folded before the dying fire. The crackle of burning wood is the only reply. Each morning, he walks among the harbors of Carthage alone. The smell of salt and cedar fills the air, mingled with the cries of dockworkers, merchants, and sailors shouting in a dozen tongues. He passes ships of black oak bound for Iberia, traders from the Atlas Mountains bearing gold dust and ostrich feathers, and Greek envoys clutching scrolls of parchment, drawn to the new light of the Western world. He lingers in the marketplace, watching how wealth moves without war, how the invisible hand of commerce holds together what empires often break. For the first time, Alexander sees an empire unlike his own, not one carved by spear or siege, but built by patience, by trade winds, by words. Carthage is alive in ways no conquered city ever was. Its people proud, cunning, unbroken. Their gods still sing in the temples. Their coins still bear their own kings. Even in submission, they rule themselves. And in that, he feels a strange and unfamiliar envy. At night, in his private quarters aboard the flagship Helios Invictus, Alexander studies his maps. The candlelight dances across scrolls that stretch from the Indus to Iberia, a tapestry of conquest, every river, every mountain inked with the weight of his will. And yet his eyes keep drifting west, to the blank expanse beyond the Pillars of Hercules, to the edge of the known world, where only myths and ocean currents dwell. Hephaestion finds him there one night, still awake. "You are restless," he says quietly. "You have conquered the world, and still you dream of what lies beyond it." Alexander looks up, eyes shadowed by fatigue and thought. "I have conquered men," he says, "but not myself." He rolls the maps aside. "Every empire I've built was made of walls and swords. Carthage is built of trust, of exchange, not fear. What if this is what empire was meant to be?" Hephaestion studies him a long while, then answers, "Or perhaps this is the peace before the storm, the calm before your next vision." But not all share his reflection. Among the soldiers, rumors spread like wildfire. They speak of Carthaginian spies, of generals bribed with gold and promises, of fleets gathering beyond the horizon. Tension thickens the air like the desert heat. The Macedonians, forged for war, now find themselves idle amid wealth they did not win. Drunken brawls break out in the taverns by the docks. In the night, blades flash between shadows, soldiers against merchants, east against west. Each dawn, the city grows more uneasy. The Carthaginians watch their guests with measured smiles and wary eyes. In every handshake, a question trembles. Will peace endure, or is it merely conquest delayed? The philosopher's dilemma in the gardens of the Temple of Tanit. Alexander meets with the high priestess once more. The wind stirs her veil as she speaks. You cannot unite the world with both hands open. One must hold the sword, the other the scale. Without balance, the world devours itself. Her words echo through him long after she departs. Balance. That was what he had never mastered. He had taken cities, dethroned kings, named himself God, but never found the stillness between creation and destruction. And now, standing at the edge of Africa, watching Carthage glitter beneath the sun, he wonders if the next world to conquer is not across the sea, but within his own heart. That night, a storm rolls in from the west. Lightning tears across the sea, and thunder shakes the walls of the harbor. In his tent, Alexander dreams. He dreams of a vast city made of glass and light, a place where all languages blend into one, where trade replaces war and faith becomes understanding. But as he reaches out to touch it, the vision shatters, and the sea rises up, swallowing everything in silence. He wakes before dawn, the rain still pounding on his tent. The horizon flashes with white fire. He steps out into the storm, the wind ripping through his cloak, and whispers to the darkness, "I have seen what peace might be. But peace, it seems, does not want me." The year is 316 BCE. Carthage stands as the glittering jewel of the Western Sea, proud, ancient, untamed. The city's harbors glow each evening with lamps that stretch for miles. Hundreds of ships from every known world rocking upon the tide, sails fluttering like the wings of 1,000 nations. For weeks, tension has simmered beneath the surface. Alexander's men, restless, weary, and alien to this land, trade uneasy glances with Carthaginian merchants who whisper in their own tongue as they pass. Rumors spill from the taverns like smoke that Alexander intends to seize the docks, that the Macedonians plan to enslave the sailors of Phoenician blood, that the conqueror of the East will not stop until the West bends its knee. The peace so recently forged begins to crack, not in words, but in silence. It begins with a single act of fear. A Carthaginian admiral, old, proud, and haunted by memories of Tyre's fall, mistakes a Macedonian supply ship for an armed fleet approaching under the cloak of night. The moonlight glimmers upon oars. Shadows move across the waves. The admiral gives the order, and a flaming arrow arcs through the dark. It lands upon a Greek ship's sail. Canvas catches, oil ignites. Within moments, the calm of the harbor transforms into an inferno. Fire devours rope, timber, and tar. Flames leap from hull to hull like wild beasts, roaring into the night sky. The docks, once alive with laughter and trade, are swallowed by chaos. Men screaming in a dozen languages, ships breaking loose, the sea turning red with reflected flame. Alexander awakens to the sound of bells, not the chime of temple prayer, but the alarm of war. He rides through the smoke-filled streets, cloak snapping in the wind, his eyes ablaze with disbelief. Through the haze, he sees the harbor, once his vision of peace, now a nightmare of destruction. He dismounts. The air burns with the scent of oil and salt. He shouts orders, not to attack, but to save. No vengeance, he commands, no retaliation. Pull the wounded from the fire. Soldiers, half mad with panic, obey. Greek and Carthaginian alike dive into the burning water, dragging men from the flames, pulling corpses to shore. The cries of the dying echo across the stone quays like prayers unanswered. The firelight dances on Alexander's armor, gold, red, and black, the color of empire dying. Hours pass. By dawn, half the harbor lies in ruin. Charred ships smolder beside the quays. Their masts collapsed into the sea like blackened bones. Carthaginian merchants wail for their lost fortunes. Greek sailors curse the gods who led them here. Alexander stands at the edge of the water, his reflection rippling beneath him. A distorted god surrounded by smoke and ruin. He knows the truth before his generals dare speak it aloud. The peace he built has turned to ashes. In every corner of the empire, word will spread that Alexander's men have burned the harbor of Carthage, that the king of the world cannot control his own soldiers, that the conqueror who once brought unity has now brought only destruction. The survivors gather in silence. The smell of ash clings to every robe, every beard, every blade. Alexander addresses them not as a god, but as a man. Voice trembling, eyes hollow. "This," he says, gesturing to the ruins behind him, "is what fear creates when trust is lost. We came to build bridges, and we have built Pyre's Hephaestion watches from a distance, his face unreadable. He knows what Alexander refuses to admit. The Western dream is dead. Carthage will not forgive, and the world, even one as vast as his, is too small to contain this fire." The wind shifts. Ashes drift upward like black snow, rising above the city's shattered masts, symbols of ambition that flew too close to the sun. Later, as dawn bleeds across the horizon, Alexander walks alone through the wreckage. He kneels beside the charred hull of a Greek trireme, its figurehead, once a lion of gold, now cracked, hollow, blackened. He touches it softly, like a mourner caressing a tomb. He whispers, almost to himself, "We were meant to build, not consume." Behind him, the sea smokes gently, its waves carrying fragments of burnt rope, broken shields, and a single glimmering crown of laurel floating out to sea. The camera lingers, the crown spinning slowly, turning once in the light, before sinking beneath the surface. In the following days, silence falls over the camp. Trade halts. Carthaginian emissaries refuse to speak. And in the royal quarters, Alexander remains awake through the nights, gazing out at the blackened harbor, his face pale in the candlelight. He dreams of Babylon, of Tyre, of Thebes, of cities that burned before, and the same pattern repeating like a curse. Each time he built, he destroyed. Each time he united, he divided. Now even the sea, his last ally, turns against him. It is here in the ashes of Carthage's harbor that the legend shifts. No longer the boy who sought to conquer the world, Alexander becomes the man haunted by what conquest costs. He will rebuild the harbor, but not with marble nor with slaves. He will rebuild it with treaties, trade, and the promise of mercy. Yet somewhere deep within him, a whisper grows. Quiet, relentless, like the tide returning. Peace is fleeting. Power is eternal. The camera pans upward, the city of Carthage smoldering beneath a crimson dawn, smoke rising like incense toward a silent sky. From the fire in the harbor, a new shadow was born, not of empire, but of destiny. The flame that destroys is the same that purifies, and as the smoke lifted over Carthage, Alexander, the man who sought to unite the world, began his final march toward the edge of the known world. The year is 312 BCE. Carthage, once scarred but unbroken by Alexander's presence, has rebuilt its fleets, mighty vessels of cedar and iron that rule the western waves. Its merchants whisper of vengeance in every port from Sicily to Iberia. Across the Aegean, in the marble halls of Alexandria Eterna, Alexander's council warns him, Carthage arms beneath the banner of trade, not war. But Alexander knows better. Empires never trade without ambition. The scent of smoke on the sea is not commerce, it is challenge. He walks to the edge of the palace balcony, his gaze fixed westward across the wine-dark sea. The wind carries salt, and something colder, the taste of prophecy. If they seek the sea as their kingdom, he murmurs, then the tide shall choose its master. And so begins the War of the Western Sea, the Punic War of Alexander. The Macedonian army, once the spear of the world, transforms. Engineers and shipwrights from Egypt, Phoenicia, and Greece labor together, building a new fleet under Alexander's vision. Triremes armed not with rams, but with towers and catapults. Floating fortresses, machines of storm and fire. Hephaestion commands the naval forces, while Alexander himself studies the tides, drawing new maps by torchlight as waves crash against the docks below. The ports of Cyrene and Alexandria thunder with the clamor of men and iron. Drums beat like war hearts. Priests bless the sails with oil and blood. The ships bear names of gods. Poseidon's wrath, Amun's flame, Zeus triumphant. From the straits of Sicily to the gates of Gibraltar, merchants flee before the storm that rises, an empire learning to master the sea. The first battle erupts off the coast of Sardinia. Morning mist cloaks the fleets as they approach each other. Carthaginian ships gliding silent as predators, their black sails blotting out the sun. Then, the Macedonian horns sound. Catapults thunder. Greek fire streaks across the waves in ribbons of gold and red. The sea becomes a burning mirror, and within it men scream and vanish beneath smoke and salt. The Carthaginians counter with speed and cunning. Their ships dart between Alexander's heavy fortresses, harpoons flashing, boarding parties leaping onto decks slick with oil and blood. The air fills with arrows, with the clash of iron and cries of the dying. For hours the battle rages, until the setting sun turns the horizon crimson. The water runs dark, and the Mediterranean, once a sea of trade, becomes a sea of ghosts. Weeks later, Alexander lands on the coast of North Africa. The dunes stretch endless before him, pale gold under a pitiless sky. Carthaginian war elephants emerge from the mirage, their tusks sheathed in bronze, their eyes wild with fear and fury. The Macedonians, unaccustomed to beasts of such scale, falter, but Alexander rides forward alone. He raises his hand, and the phalanx reforms around him like a living wall. Behind him, siege towers creak across the sand, rolling on wheels of oak reinforced with iron. From their heights, ballistae firebolts that pierce elephant armor, and the desert trembles with the sound of thunder and death. As the beasts fall, the dust clears, and the city of Carthage rises in the distance, its walls glimmering red in the sun, its towers wreathed in banners of purple and gold. Alexander whispers to Hephaestion, "I have seen Babylon's pride, Tyre's defiance, and Egypt's silence, but never have I seen a city so proud of its fear." The siege lasts for months. Carthage holds firm, its harbors chained shut, its citizens fighting from rooftops with stones and torches. But Alexander forbids its destruction. He orders food sent secretly to starving children beyond the walls. He walks among the wounded, Macedonian and Carthaginian alike, bandaging their wounds with his own hands. His generals whisper, "The king has grown soft." Yet Alexander knows the truth. To destroy Carthage is to destroy the soul of the sea itself. He dreams of something greater, a city that unites the wisdom of Greece with the commerce of Carthage, the empire of land and the empire of water joined as one. On the 92nd day of siege, Carthage's gates finally open. The defenders, gaunt and hollow-eyed, lay down their arms. The harbor smolders, its ships half sunk and half scorched. The ghosts of firelight dancing upon black water. Alexander enters the city not as a conqueror, but as a pilgrim. He rides through streets littered with ash, past temples still smoking from divine wrath, and dismounts before the steps of Tanit's sanctuary. There, amid the ruin, he kneels. He places his sword upon the altar. "I came to unite the world," he says, "not devour it." The priests, trembling, approach. They lay wreaths of olive and myrrh upon him, and for the first time, Carthaginian voices chant his name, not as an enemy, but as a god reborn from flame. In the months that follow, Alexander rebuilds what he once sought to conquer. He summons architects from Athens, masons from Egypt, traders from Tyre. Together, they raise a new city from the ashes, Alexandria Carthaginus, a fusion of East and West, a monument to reconciliation rather than ruin. Under his decree, Carthaginian ships sail once more, this time under a shared banner, the sigil of the twin dolphins, one facing east, one west. For the first time, the Mediterranean belongs not to one empire, but to a vision, a living network of cultures bound by trust, not terror. But peace is never without its shadow. As Alexander walks through his new city, the faces of the dead haunt him in every street. The whispers of the generals grow louder, men who miss the certainty of war more than the fragility of peace. Hephaestion alone sees the weight crushing his king's spirit. He warns him quietly, "You have conquered the world, Alexander. But can you govern it?" The sea wind answers for him, cold, unending, and full of the cries of lost sailors. Years later, as the old wounds fade, travelers will speak of a city born from fire, a city where Greek philosophers debate beside Phoenician merchants, and Egyptian priests pray in temples that open toward the sea. And above its gates, carved in marble and bronze, a single inscription reads, "Here ended conquest. Here began unity." The Punic War of Alexander was not written in history, but in the imagination of what might have been. For had he lived, the world may have seen not the ruin of Carthage, but its resurrection, not Rome's empire of iron, but Alexander's empire of harmony. The fire that once destroyed the harbor would instead illuminate a new world, where conquerors learn to build, and where the sea at last belongs to all. The air still smelled of ash and myrrh. The ruins of Carthage smoldered quietly beneath a bronze dusk, columns cracked by fire, temples half collapsed, and the harbor littered with blackened ships that once ruled the western sea. The cries of battle had faded, leaving only the distant echo of hammers rebuilding and the mournful rhythm of the waves against the shore. Alexander stood upon the temple steps of Baal Hammon, where once priests had offered incense and flame to a god of storms. Now, under the open sky, the conqueror and the conquered faced one another. The air was heavy, not with hatred, but with awe. The Carthaginian elders approached in silence, their robes torn and faces darkened with smoke. Yet their eyes burned with something more enduring than fear: pride. They had defended their city, their gods, their freedom. And now they stood before a man who could have destroyed all, yet had chosen instead to build anew. A long table of cedar had been placed before the ruined altar. Upon it lay a simple parchment, the terms of peace. No chains, no humiliation, only words. Words that would shape the fate of continents. Alexander spoke first, his voice low, measured, carried by the wind. "Two suns have risen in this world," he said, "one from the east, one from the west. Alone they cast shadows. Together they give light to all mankind." The elders listened. Some trembled, some wept, and some, the oldest among them, nodded slowly, understanding that destiny had turned not toward conquest, but toward creation. The pact was simple, yet revolutionary. Carthage would remain free, its laws, its traditions, its gods preserved. But its fleets, the greatest the world had known, would sail beneath the standard of Alexander's empire, a standard of twin suns upon a field of indigo, symbolizing unity without submission. He ordered that the city be rebuilt, not as a vassal, but as a partner. He commanded that temples to both Zeus and Baal Hammon be raised side by side, their columns of Greek marble and Phoenician cedar entwined, their altars burning with the same sacred flame. He decreed that markets be reopened from India to Iberia, their goods to flow freely, silks from the Indus, spices from Arabia, silver from Spain, amber from the Baltic. No longer would the sea be a barrier of empires. It would be a living artery of civilization, the heart of a single world. Scholars from Athens and priests from Tyre were summoned to design the new city. They envisioned streets lined with palm and olive, harbors deep enough for triremes and merchant galleys alike, and great plazas where philosophers and merchants could speak as equals. A library was planned, a mirror to the one rising in Alexandria of Egypt, to hold the wisdom of both East and West. Alexander named this alliance the Conquered of the Two Suns, for one rose in the east, from Babylon, from Persia, from India, and one rose in the west, from Carthage, from Iberia, from the lands of the setting sun. Both, he said, shared the same light, the light of reason, courage, and human greatness. In time, poets would sing of that day as the dawn of the united sea, the birth of the Mare Hellenica. Ships bearing Greek lettering and Punic carvings began to cross its waters together, Their sails gleamed white beneath twin emblems, the lion of Macedon and the dolphins of Carthage, no longer a sea divided by fear, but bound by vision. The Mediterranean, once the theater of endless wars, became a mirror reflecting a new dream. The dream of a world ruled not by one race or faith or city, but by the shared spirit of humankind. And as night fell upon the ruins, the torches of the workers lit the darkened harbor like constellations scattered upon the sea. Alexander walked among them, unguarded, listening to their songs in foreign tongues, songs of mourning and of hope. He turned to Hephaestion's empty seat, to the memory of his dearest friend who would never see this peace, and whispered softly into the cooling wind, "It is done, my brother. The fire is out, and light remains above him. 2 stars burned bright, one in the east, one in the west. And in their eternal glow, the dream of the 2 suns began to rise." The Mediterranean lay calm, but it was not silent. Beneath its glittering surface, history stirred. In the east, Alexander's empire glowed like a constellation, cities shining from Egypt to India, harbors alive with trade and philosophy, and the air itself humming with languages, music, and ambition. Yet far to the west, across the Tyrrhenian Sea, in the rugged hills of Latium, another sun was rising, dimmer, colder, but steady. A republic still young, still fragile, still bound by oaths, blood, and the discipline of iron. Its people called it Roma. At first, Rome was little more than a whisper on the wind, a modest city by the Tiber, its walls plain, its gods austere. While Alexander built marble capitals crowned with gold, Rome forged itself from stone and sweat. While philosophers debated the soul of man in the marble courtyards of Alexandria Eterna, Roman soldiers trained barefoot in the dust, their commanders barking commands older than their language itself. The 2 worlds, though unknowing, were already turning toward each other like twin planets fated to collide. It was in the 15th year of Alexander's western peace that rumors reached his court in Alexandria Carthaginus. A delegation from a small republic, Latin-speaking proud, had crossed the sea to seek audience with the Lord of the 2 suns. The Romans came simply dressed, tunics of coarse wool, no gold, no silks. Their sandals were worn from travel, their expressions hard and unyielding. They bowed neither low nor long. They spoke of friendship, of trade, of mutual respect. But beneath their words lay unease. They had seen his fleets, his roads, his marble cities that seemed to rise overnight, and in their hearts they knew. Where such a man walked, others ceased to rule. Alexander welcomed them with the charm of a philosopher king. He listened, asked questions, spoke of harmony between East and West. He offered to send scholars to Rome to share knowledge of astronomy, medicine, and art. The Roman envoy, an older senator named Aulus Marcius, listened in polite silence, then replied simply, "We have our own laws, my lord. We prefer the wisdom of our ancestors to the brilliance of strangers." Alexander smiled, but in that smile there was a shadow. He recognized something familiar, a fire he had seen once before in the Persians, a conviction that the world should bend to its own order. When the Romans departed, he watched their ship vanish into the silver horizon and whispered to his general, "They are few, yet they will be many. They are small, yet they think in empires." In Rome, the senators gathered in the forum, beneath the pale light of dawn. Their faces were weathered, their voices rough like stone against stone. The returning envoys spoke of what they had seen: cities larger than any in Latium, temples of impossible scale, libraries filled with the words of 1,000 nations, and one man, golden-haired and calm, commanding the allegiance of the world. Some senators trembled with awe, others clenched their fists. For to the Roman mind, no man, however gifted, should stand above the laws of his people. Consul Titus Manlius rose from his seat and thundered, "He may rule the East, but he will never rule Rome. We bow only to our own gods, and even they must answer to the Senate." The chamber erupted in applause. But beneath that pride was fear. For if Alexander's legions ever turned north across the sea, Rome's walls would crumble like clay before the storm. Across the sea, Alexander pondered this new power in silence. He invited his philosophers, Greeks, Persians, Egyptians, and Carthaginians, to debate what Rome might become. Some dismissed it. A provincial backwater, they said, a hill tribe playing at politics. But others saw danger. One scholar from Athens warned, "They build not with marble, but with obedience. Their strength is not in glory, but in law. They worship the collective, not the king." Alexander listened, but said little, for perhaps he saw in Rome the reflection of his own ambition, a younger mirror, colder and more disciplined. Where he conquered with vision, they would conquer with patience. Where his empire sought unity through ideas, theirs would forge it through order, steel, and citizenship. And so, though neither raised a sword, the first great war between Alexander and Rome began, a war not of blood, but of spirit. In the East, marble cities thrived upon philosophy, art, and curiosity. In the West, roads stretched outward from Rome like veins of conquest, discipline hardening with each passing year. Alexander's empire was a symphony, fluid, radiant, ever-changing. Rome's republic was a drumbeat, steady, relentless, unyielding. Both believed they carried civilization itself. Both thought the other was blind. Years passed. Messengers came and went. Treaties signed and forgotten. But destiny, like a patient tide, drew the two closer. When Alexander gazed west from his palace balcony, the horizon seemed darker than before, as though something vast were gathering beyond it. He dreamed one night of a wolf and a lion. The lion, golden, proud, crowned with sun, stood upon a field of white stone. The wolf, gray, scarred, and silent, watched from the shadows, and when the lion roared, the wolf did not flee. It waited. When he awoke, Alexander called for his scribes and said, "There will come a day when marble turns to iron and law will chain the dream." He looked once more to the western sky, where the light faded slowly into gray, and whispered, not in fear, but in recognition, "So it begins." The shadow of Rome had fallen across the sea, not yet a sword, not yet an empire, but already a destiny. While Alexander dreamed of unity through wonder, Rome dreamed of order through strength. And in the space between those dreams, the future of the world began to take shape. The sun bleeds into the Tyrrhenian Sea, its dying light painting the waters in molten gold. Upon a windswept cliff in Sicily, Alexander stands alone, the conqueror-turned philosopher king. His cloak whips violently in the western wind. Below, the waves crash against black rock like thunder in slow motion. He is older now. His face bears the marks of time, not defeat, but experience. Every scar upon his body tells the story of a continent tamed, of nations rebuilt, of cities born from his will. Behind him stretch the marble courtyards of a new Hellenic world, a world he has shaped not through war, but through the gentle architecture of peace. His gaze, though, is elsewhere. fixed upon the burning horizon. Beyond Iberia, beyond the edge of every map, lies something unspoken, the world yet unborn. Even the sun must set, he murmurs, but beyond that horizon, it rises again. The sea wind carries his words like prayer, scattering them into eternity. In the distance, ships are moored in the harbor, vast vessels of Greek design fused with Phoenician sails, symbols of his empire's unity. On their prows, bronze lions gleam in the fading sun, their mouths open in silent roar. Scholars walk the docks, carrying scrolls filled with astronomical charts, maps of constellations, and notes on the currents of the Atlantic. They speak of a new ocean, of a land whispered about by sailors from Carthage and beyond, a Western world untouched by empire, where the gods might sleep. Alexander listens. He does not dismiss them. He has learned that myth and truth often share the same breath. Inside his mind, a plan begins to form, a final expedition, not for conquest, but for revelation. No longer would he seek to rule. He would seek to understand. The known world is no longer enough. He wishes to meet the unimaginable. When I was young, he says to Ptolemy beside him, I thought the world ended at the Indus. Now I know, the world ends only when our imagination does. The general bows, saying nothing, for he knows nothing ends with Alexander. That night, a banquet is held beneath the Sicilian stars. Poets recite verses of Troy and Babylon. Philosophers debate the nature of divinity and human will. Alexander sits at the center, his eyes reflecting the torchlight. Bright, restless, eternal. He does not drink. He listens. The laughter of his companions fades into the sea breeze, and in that quiet, he hears another sound, the whisper of the waves against the shore, a language older than empire. He thinks of his youth in Macedon, of his father's dream, of Aristotle's lessons beneath olive trees, of Hephaestion's smile beneath a Persian sky. He wonders, would they have followed him still, even now, into the unknown west? The torches burn low. The stars above flicker like silver scars upon the heavens. Alexander whispers to himself, perhaps the gods were not jealous of my victories, but of my refusal to stop dreaming. At dawn, he rises before his men. Mist rolls across the water, veiling the sea like a shroud. He descends to the harbor, where sailors prepare the ships, provisions, instruments, charts, and hopes drawn in ink. The air hums with the sound of ropes and waves. As Alexander steps aboard the flagship, the sailors kneel, not as subjects, but as witnesses to history's final voyage. He raises his hand, not in farewell, but in blessing. To the west, he commands softly, where the sun is reborn. Oars dip into the sea in perfect rhythm, 1,000 heartbeats merging into one vast pulse of destiny. The fleet drifts from the harbor, golden sails catching the morning light. On the cliff above, statues of his past campaigns stand silent, guardians of an age now fading into legend. As the ships disappear into the mist, the music swells, low, haunting, and triumphant. The screen fades to gold. Centuries pass. Empires rise, crumble, and vanish. But in every city touched by his vision, from Alexandria to Persepolis, from Athens to Babylon reborn, the idea of unity, knowledge, and unending curiosity endures. Philosophers will quote his words. Explorers will follow his path. Kings will whisper his name before battle, and poets will write of him not as a man, but as a horizon that could not be conquered. And so, standing once more upon the edge of time, the spirit of Alexander looks westward, toward lands unseen, toward futures unknown. There will always be another horizon, the voice of eternity declares. And always, another Alexander to seek it. The camera rises high above the sea, following the glimmering wake of his ships as they vanish into light. The sun crowns the world, and the dream of humanity sails forever onward. After years of conquest, the thunder of Alexander's armies fades. Babylon becomes more than a city. It becomes an idea. Here the Macedonian king begins his greatest conquest, order itself. He rebuilds the ruins of war into a new harmony of nations. From the Indus to the Aegean, he commands not destruction, but creation. Artisans from Egypt, scribes from Persia, and engineers from Greece labor together beneath banners of the rising sun, Alexander's new symbol of unity. Stone by stone, he reshapes the old empires into one pulse, one rhythm, one civilization. In the palace gardens, fountains murmur with words from many tongues. The king listens to all, Greek, Median, Aramaic, and dreams of a language that could bind the world together. His courtiers whisper of a new era, the age of peace born from conquest. But even peace under Alexander is not stillness. It is the silence before another transformation. The sword now rests, and in its place rises the scroll. Alexander gathers thinkers from every corner of his realm, mathematicians from India, astronomers from Babylon, healers from Egypt, and philosophers from Athens. Together, they form the Synedrion of the world, a council where wisdom is not bound by tribe or faith. Here, Alexander listens, not as conqueror, but as student. He learns of Ayurvedic medicine, of the stars charted in Sanskrit, of Egyptian alchemy. Under his guidance, a grand project begins, to map the heavens and the earth alike. One night, standing upon the palace balcony, Alexander gazes at the starlit river and whispers to his companions, "If I have united the world in body, now I must unite it in mind." He orders schools to be built in every province, each bearing his crest, the son of Ammon. Through these academies, Greek logic and Eastern wisdom flow together like rivers merging into an ocean. The result is not domination, but synthesis, the birth of the first truly global civilization. For Alexander, peace is a campaign against distance. He sends his engineers across deserts, jungles, and mountains to bind the empire with arteries of stone and water. New trade routes rise where once only armies marched. The royal highway now stretches from Macedonia to the Indus, paved with marble milestones, guarded by outposts of mixed soldiers. Macedonians beside Persians, Egyptians beside Scythians. Caravans move like lifeblood, carrying silk, gold, papyrus, and philosophy alike. In the east, the mighty Indus River becomes the empire's spine. Alexander orders canals dug from its banks, irrigating lands that once starved under drought. Villages bloom where only dust lay before. And upon the waters of the Persian Gulf, his fleet sails west, not to conquer, but to connect. The world, Alexander declares, shall have no edges, only crossings. Under his reign, geography itself begins to yield to will. The old borders between east and west blur, then vanish. A continent awakens, stitched together by the vision of one restless mind. But empires are not only built from roads and stone, they are built from blood and belonging. Alexander, seeing the divisions within his army, makes a bold decree. Macedonian veterans and Persian nobles will intermarry, forging a single generation, the children of the sun. The ceremony at Babylon is unlike any before it. Thousands stand beneath the moon, each man taking a wife from the lands he once conquered. The air rings with hymns in a dozen tongues. Alexander himself weds again, a princess of Median and Indian descent, symbol of the unity he dreams of. Yet not all rejoice. Among his generals, old tensions rise. Many whisper that the king is no longer Macedonian, that he belongs to no one, that his empire is slipping into myth. Still, Alexander does not waver. He looks upon the newly joined couples and proclaims, "I have not blended bloods, I have blended destinies." And from that night forward, a new nobility is born, one not of lineage, but of loyalty to a universal ideal. 20 years after his conquest began, Alexander is no longer the youthful warrior of Pella. He has become something greater, a living bridge between gods and men. His empire no longer conquers. It governs, teaches, and remembers. He is no longer the destroyer of cities, but their protector. From his throne, he sees not territory, but continuity, an endless thread binding humanity's story. Under his reign, the calendar is reformed, the laws standardized, the sciences funded, the temples rebuilt. He commands that all faiths be honored, for he believes truth is many-faced, yet born of one light. In the twilight of his reign, he stands again upon the terrace of Babylon, the same place where he had once fallen ill. Now he looks west, toward the sea, and smiles. "When I die," he says softly, "let them say not that I ruled the world, but that I made it one." And with that, the wind stirs his cloak, not as farewell, but as applause. The empire hums below like a heartbeat that will echo through millennia. The camera pulls back. Babylon glowing beneath the stars, roads spreading like veins of gold across a living world. Alexander's voice fades into eternity. There is no east. There is no west. There is only the world, and the dream of what it might become. Morning breaks over Babylon, not as a beginning, but as a revelation. Where once smoke rose from the ruins of war, now rises the breath of creation. The city of kings has become the city of all men, the beating heart of an empire that spans continents. From the deserts of Egypt to the forests of India, caravans move like veins of purpose, pulsing toward this radiant center. Here, Alexander walks not as a conqueror, but as a builder of worlds. The clang of hammers replaces the clash of swords. The song of languages mingles like instruments in divine harmony. He has seen enough blood. Now he wishes to see what civilization looks like when the blade is set aside and wisdom rules the throne. In marble halls and shaded gardens, he listens to Persian astrologers, Indian mystics, Egyptian priests, and Greek philosophers. Each speaks of the stars, of the soul, of the meaning of empire. And Alexander, who once dreamt of glory, begins to dream of something greater. Order, not imposed, but inspired. A world divided cannot endure, he tells his council. So let us make one world, one law, one vision, one mankind. And so Alexander summons the leaders of his empire, not as vassals, not as subjects, but as equals beneath the heavens. From the west come the Macedonian generals, scarred, proud, disciplined. From the east arrive Persian nobles robed in silk, their eyes wary but curious. From India come scholars bearing scrolls filled with stars and numbers. From Egypt, priests carrying relics of gods older than memory. Together, they stand in the echoing hall of Babylon, the world gathered beneath one roof. Alexander rises from his throne, unarmed, robed in white, and speaks not of conquest, but of destiny. You were born of different lands, he says, but the gods breathe through us all the same. Today we end the age of nations. Today we begin the age of mankind. A silence follows, not of fear, but of awe. For the world has never heard such words. In that moment, the old world order dies, and a new one takes its first breath. With the council established, Alexander sets forth his greatest decree, the Code of Concord. A single set of laws to govern the many, a harmony of Greek justice, Persian discipline, and Indian ethics. No man shall be judged by his birth, but by his deeds. No faith shall be forbidden, for truth wears many faces, and no border shall divide those who share purpose. Courts rise where once there were fortresses. Schools replace barracks. Where the spear once pierced the earth, olive trees now take root. The dream of one law becomes the reality of one civilization, a network of cities, all joined by the same ideals. Each bears the name of its founder, Alexandria by the Nile, by the Indus, by the Tigris. But each beats with the same heart. Here, a new kind of citizen is born. Not Macedonian, not Persian, but human. I did not conquer to enslave, Alexander writes to his governors, but to awaken mankind to its own greatness. Under this new order, the world becomes not a battlefield, but a classroom. From Athens come the disciples of Aristotle. From Egypt, astronomers with bronze instruments that track the dance of the stars. From India, physicians who map the body like a cosmos in miniature. Alexander walks among them, listening, questioning, learning. He funds observatories, schools, and archives. He commands that every discovery be shared, translated, preserved. Babylon becomes the first true capital of knowledge, a city where wisdom travels faster than armies ever could. Under its shining towers, men of every tongue debate the nature of creation, the movement of planets, the origin of the soul. And Alexander, who once sought immortality through war, now seeks it through understanding. To rule the world is nothing, he says. To comprehend it, that is divine. In these years, mathematics evolves, medicine advances, philosophy deepens. 1,000 minds build upon the foundation of one man's dream, and so empire becomes enlightenment. But Alexander's greatest act is not one of conquest, nor law, nor learning. It is of faith. He builds the temple of the sun, a shrine not to one god, but to all. Its dome opens to the sky, letting the light of heaven fall upon every altar. Greek priests stand beside magi, beside Brahmins, beside Egyptian hierophants. Each chants in their own tongue. Yet together, their voices form a single prayer. The divine, Alexander declares, is not divided by language or land. The light that shines through one window shines through all here. For the first time, the religions of the world share a single house. It is the symbol of Alexander's dream made flesh, the fusion of body, mind, and spirit under one sun. And as torches are lit across the empire that night, their light forms a constellation visible from the heavens, a world illuminated by unity. Let future ages say, Alexander whispers beneath the stars, that in my time, mankind remembered it was one. 2 decades have passed since Babylon became the center of the world. Where war once ruled, peace now breathes. Where chaos reigned, harmony now endures. Alexander's empire is no longer merely land, it is legacy. A living network of ideas, knowledge, and faith, woven from the threads of 1,000 nations. The world, once broken by ambition, has been mended by vision. And as the sun sets over the Euphrates, casting golden light upon the city that was once ruin, A quiet truth fills the air. The greatest conquest, says the voice of eternity, is not of nations, but of the human heart. The camera drifts skyward. The shining world spreads below, roads glowing like veins of gold, rivers gleaming like mirrors of light. And upon that world, one voice lingers. Alexander dreamed of empire and gave birth to civilization. Alexander steps into the Hall of Wisdom, not as a conqueror, but as a student. The echoes of past victories fade beneath the murmur of scholars. Here, Greek philosophers debate with Persian astronomers. Indian mathematicians calculate the movements of distant stars. Egyptian priests translate the secrets of the Nile into lessons for the ages. He moves between them, listening, questioning, absorbing. Every voice carries a fragment of truth, and Alexander is intent on gathering them all. "I have conquered armies," he tells his companions, "but the greatest conquest is of knowledge itself." Candles flicker across bronze astrolabes, illuminated scrolls, and polished tables. The smell of ink and papyrus fills the air. The new battlefield of minds. The Sanhedrin of minds, Alexander's greatest experiment, is born. For the first time, thinkers from every land are gathered not for war, but for wisdom. Here, Macedonian generals listen to Indian philosophers explain zero and infinity. Persian astrologers debate the alignment of stars with Greek mathematicians. Egyptian physicians demonstrate surgical techniques once secret to the priests alone. Alexander presides silently, absorbing every nuance. He understands that empire is meaningless without the mind's expansion. "If we unite armies under a single banner," he muses, "why not unite thought under a single purpose?" The council debates, sketches diagrams on scrolls, argues softly, but always under the gaze of a king who values curiosity over command. When the sun sets, Alexander climbs the ziggurat with his astronomers. The night sky stretches endlessly, constellations shimmering like the embers of eternity. He studies celestial movements, plotting courses across the heavens and imagining voyages beyond the edge of the known world. He orders the construction of massive instruments, sextants, armillary spheres, and water clocks, to measure time, distance, and the movements of planets with unprecedented precision. "The universe is a map," Alexander whispers, tracing the stars with his hand. "And we have only begun to chart it." By night, the observatory hums with quiet conversation. Calculations are made, hypotheses tested. The king listens intently, occasionally jotting a note or asking a question that sends even the wisest scholar into deep thought. By day, Alexander applies philosophy to governance. He walks among his ministers, questioning the morality of laws, the ethics of empire, and the responsibilities of rulers. Stoics teach him self-control. Cynics challenge his assumptions. Platonists explore the nature of reality. Every conversation becomes a lesson in both leadership and life. To rule wisely, he tells his advisors, one must first understand oneself. He establishes schools and lecture halls in every major city. Children from all cultures study side by side, learning mathematics, rhetoric, astronomy, and philosophy. The empire begins to pulse not only with commerce and culture, but with reason and curiosity. Years pass, and Alexander grows older, but his mind burns ever brighter. He has moved beyond the battlefield. His victories are now in the library, the classroom, and the council chamber. He dreams not of lands to conquer, but of knowledge to spread. From his balcony, He watches students practice debate, astronomers chart the sky, and engineers test new machines. The empire is alive with thought, invention, and wisdom, a living testament to what a king can achieve when ambition is tempered by intellect. Let it be known, Alexander whispers to the evening wind, that I sought not only to rule, but to awaken the minds of men. The camera pulls back, rising over Babylon's walls. The lights of countless scrolls and torches glow like constellations mirroring the heavens above. Alexander's gaze remains fixed on the horizon, always searching, always learning, always dreaming. The world has never seen such a city. Babylon, reborn by Alexander's hand, stands as the radiant center of the earth. Its streets are wide enough for chariots of gold, and its towers reach toward the heavens. Greek temples rise beside Persian palaces, Egyptian obelisks beside Indian stupas. The air carries the scent of incense, papyrus, and new-forged bronze. Here the languages of 4 continents mingle like a song. Here the boundaries between cultures blur into unity. Alexander walks its streets unguarded. Children run to greet him, calling his name in a dozen tongues. To the people he is not conqueror nor tyrant, but the father of a world reborn. Let no man call himself foreign beneath my sky, he declares. For there is no border now but the horizon. Babylon has become more than a city. It is the world's beating heart, the pulse of a civilization that stretches from the Nile to the Himalayas. And Alexander, philosopher, dreamer, and king, stands at its center like the sun at midday. From the heart of Babylon, veins of stone and dust reach outward, the great roads of Alexander. Engineers, soldiers, and laborers from every land work side by side. They carve paths through deserts, bridge roaring rivers, and tunnel through mountains once thought impassable. Each mile is marked by columns bearing the twin symbols of the empire, the Macedonian sun and the Persian winged lion. Merchants travel freely bearing spices, silk, gold, and ideas. Messengers ride swift horses, carrying royal decrees in every tongue. And along the roads, inns and temples rise, sanctuaries for the weary, symbols of peace. These roads do not merely connect cities. They connect minds. From Athens to Persepolis, from Memphis to Pataliputra, the empire breathes as one. For the first time in human history, civilization itself feels united, woven together by the will of one man who dreamed of harmony beyond conquest. Where roads cross, so too shall hearts, Alexander writes. The empire is not of stone, but of spirit. The legions that once marched to destroy now march to build. Alexander transforms his army into a force of creation. The veterans who once took cities now construct aqueducts and walls. The smiths who once forged swords now craft instruments and sculptures. Each general oversees a province not of war, but of learning, where Greek discipline merges with Eastern wisdom. Macedonian phalanxes train beside Persian cavalry and Indian elephants, not as enemies, but as brothers in arms under one banner. The soldiers' oaths are rewritten, no longer to kill, but to protect, no longer to conquer, but to preserve. A sword, Alexander tells them, is only holy when it guards, not when it spills. These armies bring stability to a vast world, escorting caravans, defending pilgrims, and ensuring the freedom of trade and travel. Under their watch, piracy fades, bandits vanish, and the deserts once deadly now bloom with settlements and sanctuaries. The greatest army on earth has become the keeper of peace. To bind the world not by law, But by blood, Alexander decrees a union unlike any before it, the great marriage of nations. 10,000 of his soldiers take wives from Persia, Egypt, and beyond. In a single day, East and West join hands in matrimony. Music from every land fills the air, drums, lyres, flutes, and sitars blending into one cosmic rhythm. Silk veils flutter beneath torchlight as couples exchange vows, and at the center, Alexander himself takes Roxana's hand once more, renewing his promise, not only to her, but to the world. "Let love do what war could not," he proclaims. "Let the blood of nations mingle until none can say where one ends and another begins." The marriages mark the dawn of a new civilization, not Macedonian, not Persian, but universal. In years to come, their children will speak many tongues, worship many gods, and yet share one heritage, the heritage of Alexander's dream, a single, united humanity. 20 years have passed since Alexander conquered the known world and reshaped it in his image. Babylon thrives like a living star. Its libraries overflow, its temples echo with prayer, and its roads hum with the voices of travelers. The empire stretches further than any before it, not merely in land, but in thought, in law, in spirit. For this is not an empire of conquest, but an empire of empires, a harmony of civilizations, each shining in its own brilliance, each bound by respect. "The gods made the world many," Alexander writes in his final years, "but I have made it one." From the mountains of Macedon to the sands of Arabia, from the Nile to the Ganges, the light of his vision burns, a beacon to ages unborn. He no longer dreams of immortality through battle, but through the legacy of peace and wisdom he leaves behind. As he stands upon his balcony for the final time, the wind carries the sound of children laughing in a dozen languages, and torches flicker like stars upon the earth. The world he forged no longer needs its maker, for the dream has become real, and will echo through time as the empire that united mankind. The empire fades into dust, but its idea, its harmony, its daring, its vision, endures beyond ruin and memory. For in every age where nations seek peace through understanding, the spirit of Alexander stirs again, not upon the battlefield, but within the boundless empire of the human soul. "The world is one," he said, "and so must we be." The sun descends over Babylon, casting a golden haze across the marble domes and hanging gardens. Alexander stands on the terrace of his palace, his reflection rippling in the still waters below. He is no longer the fiery youth who charged across the Granicus, his hair silvered by sun and age, his body marked by countless campaigns. Yet his eyes remain alight with that same unyielding brilliance, the look of a man who once measured himself against gods, and won. The empire breathes beneath him. From Egypt to India, trade routes hum with life. Soldiers have become farmers, conquerors have turned to builders, and philosophers from Athens, Persia, and India walk the same marble halls. Yet for Alexander, peace is both triumph and torment. He feels the ache of stillness, the quiet that follows too much glory. At night, he walks through the royal gardens, alone. The scent of jasmine drifts through the warm air. He listens not to the sounds of men, but to the rustling leaves and distant songs of the city he forged. Once he dreamed of ruling the world. Now he dreams of understanding it. Years have passed since his divinity was proclaimed. In temples from Memphis to Persepolis, Alexander's likeness is carved beside Zeus and Amun. Pilgrims come bearing offerings to the living God, the man who bridged heaven and earth. But in his private chambers, the god feels his humanity creeping in. His nights are restless. He dreams of his mother, Olympias, of her fierce devotion, her warnings that greatness demands sacrifice. He dreams of Hephaestion, gone too soon, whose absence left an unhealed wound deeper than any blade could carve. Priests chant his name. Sculptors immortalize his image. Yet Alexander feels the distance between what he is and what they believe him to be. He wonders if the gods ever felt loneliness, or if they too envied the simplicity of mortal men. And so he begins to write, scroll after scroll, a chronicle of thought rather than conquest. His words are not of battle, but of philosophy, morality, and destiny. He writes, "To rule men is to hold their fears, to love them is to set them free." Even in peace, Alexander cannot stop moving. He orders expeditions to the Arabian Peninsula, sending fleets across unknown waters to chart new coasts. He dreams of exploring Africa, of sailing beyond the Pillars of Hercules into the endless ocean. But his body, worn by years of campaigning, begins to betray him. Fevers come and go. His strength wanes. Physicians beg him to rest, yet he refuses. The mind that conquered the world will not surrender to frailty. One night, on a ship sailing down the Euphrates, Alexander gazes at the stars. The constellations shimmer above him, Orion, Perseus, the same symbols of conquest and heroism that guided him since youth. "I chased them," he whispers, "and caught nothing but their reflection." Still, he smiles. For even if the heavens remain beyond reach, he has touched something greater, the soul of mankind, united under one sky. In his later years, Alexander transforms from conqueror into teacher. He gathers scholars from every land, Indian mathematicians, Egyptian astronomers, Greek philosophers, Persian poets. They call him not king of kings, but mentor of men. Within Babylon's newly built Academy of the World, he lectures beneath vast domes painted with stars and maps of his empire. He speaks not of empire, but of balance, the equilibrium between ambition and wisdom. He tells his students, "To rule without understanding is to wield fire in darkness. To conquer without purpose is to lose oneself in victory." The scholars write his words as scripture. The world listens. And slowly, the myth of the warrior becomes the legacy of the philosopher. Despite his enlightenment, Alexander feels time closing around him like a silent tide. The coughs grow harsher, the nights longer, the fevers no longer pass. Yet he meets it all with quiet acceptance. He orders no monuments for himself, no tombs of gold. "Let my name live in the minds of the wise," he says, "not in the dust of idols." In his final days, he walks the palace halls with his son, a boy with his mother's calm and his father's fire. Together they look upon the gardens, the towers, the rivers that connect worlds. "What do you see, my son?" Alexander asks. The child answers, "I see the world you made." Alexander smiles faintly. "Then make it better." The day comes quietly. The city does not know its god is dying. At sunset, Alexander sits by the window overlooking Babylon. The river glows red and gold beneath the sinking sun. The wind stirs the curtains, carrying faint echoes of music. The songs of soldiers and builders, of children and poets. He closes his eyes and whispers, "If I have conquered anything, it was not the earth, but the limits within myself." His hand falls upon a map, not one of land or sea, but of stars. His breathing slows. The torchlight flickers once, then fades. Outside, The Euphrates carries the reflection of the dying sun, merging heaven and earth in one eternal light. And though his body will pass, the legend of Alexander, the living God who became a man again, will shine for eternity. Generations later, pilgrims still travel to Babylon to see the city he built. His teachings endure in scrolls copied and spread across continents. His roads still bind nations. His laws still echo in empires yet unborn. In temples and libraries alike, his name is spoken not as that of a conqueror, but as a question. What does it mean to be great? And in that question, whispered through centuries, Alexander lives on. No longer the god who ruled men, but the man who taught the world to dream. The wind sweeps softly across the ruins of Babylon. Once, these stones echoed with the footsteps of kings and the murmur of scholars. Now they whisper his name, Alexander. Centuries have passed. Empires have risen and fallen like waves upon the shore. Yet his legend endures, carved into marble, inked in scrolls, and spoken in the tongues of countless nations. Not as a conqueror, but as the dream that mankind refuses to forget. His roads still stretch across the desert sands, linking distant lands that once knew only war. His cities, Alexandria, Persepolis reborn, Antioch of the East, still pulse with the lifeblood of trade and learning. And in every library, under every dome where wisdom is kept, his shadow lingers. Not as a ghost, but as a guardian. In the grand library of Alexandria, scholars still gather beneath painted ceilings of the heavens he once gazed upon. They debate his words. To rule men is to love them, as if they were scripture. His writings, preserved by generations, become the foundation of a new philosophy, the harmony of nations. In Athens, statues of marble gleam under the same sun that crowned him. In Persia, poets sing of Iskandar the Just, the ruler who brought peace through knowledge. And in India, temple scholars recite tales of Sikandar Dev, the god who walked as a man. The flame of his vision, once fed by conquest, now burns with wisdom. What he built in his lifetime was empire, but what he left behind was eternity. 1,000 years after his passing, the world still follows the paths he carved. Trade, art, science, language, all carry his imprint. The cities he founded have become crossroads of civilization, where the philosophies of East and West meet like rivers merging into one sea. In the universities of Alexandria, Babylon, and Athens, his principles guide rulers and scholars alike. They speak of the Alexandrian ideal, that the strength of empire lies not in its armies, but in its unity. Astronomers map the stars using his celestial charts. Engineers still rely on the mathematics refined under his rule. Even the poets of Rome and Byzantium whisper his name with reverence, the first man to bridge the worlds of men and gods. And in the dim glow of candlelit libraries, monks and scribes trace his likeness in gold leaf, his eyes forever fixed toward the horizon. As centuries turn to millennia, the name Alexander becomes legend. Yet every age that dreams of unity, every civilization that seeks to bridge difference and build peace, rekindles his spirit. When explorers set sail beyond the known world, they carry his courage. When philosophers ponder the nature of humanity, they echo his wisdom. When leaders strive for harmony, they walk his path. Even if they do not know his name, he has become more than memory. He is a symbol of human ambition, of the unending pursuit of greatness, of the eternal hunger to touch the divine. His empire may have turned to dust, but his idea endures. that mankind, though divided by land and tongue, shares one destiny beneath the same sky. Night falls again over Babylon. The city, now rebuilt by countless generations, glows beneath the stars. The Euphrates shimmers like a river of light, carrying reflections of constellations once charted by his hand. A statue of Alexander stands in the heart of the city, no longer as a god or conqueror, but as a man gazing upward, toward eternity. Flowers rest at his feet, left by travelers who came not to worship, but to remember. And as the camera rises, above the city, above the glowing rivers and distant deserts, the constellations seem to shift. Slowly, faintly, they form the outline of a man holding a sword of light. The stars themselves carry his legacy, his fire, his vision, his eternal dream. For Alexander lives not in the dust of empire, but in every mind that dares to imagine the impossible. He is no longer the great. He is the eternal.
Subscribe for more untold history.